After his father passed away and he and his unruly sister grew older, a major turning point in his life was approaching. His mother sat him down one day to deliver a life-altering declaration. Without hesitation, she ordered him to become a shaman. She insisted that he possessed the divine aptitude for it and that the gods were actively watching over him. The young man stood there bewildered, suddenly forced to confront a reality he never wanted. However, his mother quickly followed up with a chilling warning if he refused. She proclaimed that a catastrophic disaster would eventually strike him down if he defied his spiritual calling. From that moment on, she forced him to study an endless array of occult and religious doctrines. He was made to memorize everything from sacred Buddhist scriptures to obscure and bizarre magical spells. Having already envisioned a normal future for himself, he harbored no intention of submitting to her ridiculous demands. Driven by defiance, he threw himself into his schoolwork to build a conventional life outside her control. A full decade passed as he steadfastly worked toward his own goals. Yet just as he took his very first steps out into modern adult society, his life was suddenly cut short. He was struck down right on a pedestrian crossing, dying in a horrific car accident. As his vision faded on the wet pavement, he wondered if this was the disastrous fate his mother had warned him about. However, the true shock came when a blinding light enveloped his consciousness and he was born again. Reaching out with tiny newborn hands, he was stunned to discover that an afterlife actually existed. He was forced to come to terms with the fact that everything his mother had taught him was entirely true. He realized that some truths can only be truly grasped once a person experiences them firsthand. Now living a second life, he could only question how his story had taken such a dramatic turn. With a sharp slam, a hand strikes down onto an ancient book resting on a wooden podium. Standing before a chalkboard, the long-haired young professor authoritatively announces that class is now in session. He instructs the class that they will pick up where they left off by covering the fundamentals of sigil activation. Having reincarnated into this strange fantasy realm, he muses over the incredible twist of fate that turned him into a professor at a magic academy. Meanwhile, snow gently falls across a grand, industrial city dominated by towering clock towers and smoking factory chimneys. Inside the bustling train station, steam fills the air as passengers prepare to board a massive locomotive. A courteous conductor greets traveling passengers on the platform, wishing them a pleasant journey. As a well-dressed gentleman approaches the train car, the conductor politely asks to inspect his ticket. The gloved passenger hands over his pass, receiving a polite thank you from the conductor. Boarding the train car, he steps inside to locate his designated seat for the long ride. Walking down the quiet hallway, he checks the carriage layout to find cabin 403. He pauses right outside the door marked with the brass plaque for cabin 403. Opening the compartment, he finds a distinguished silver-haired man sitting alone while reading a newspaper. The elderly gentleman lowers his paper slightly to greet his new rooming companion. Offering a polite nod in return, the young man wearing a top hat steps into the cabin. With a loud whistle and a burst of dark smoke, the steam train begins its departure. The heavy metal wheels clank against the rails as the engine accelerates out of the station. From above, the train car glides steadily along snow-covered tracks cut through a dense forest. It cuts through the icy wind, speeding past majestic snow-capped mountain peaks. Inside the peaceful cabin, both travelers sit across from each other, engrossed in their own reading materials. Glancing up from his book, the young man steals a quick look at the headlines on his cabin mate's paper. The front page reports that the intense civil war in the Kingdom of Uter has officially reached its end. An accompanying photograph details how the royal princess emerged victorious after a long struggle. Breaking the silence, the young man remarks aloud that he is glad to see the civil war in Uter has finally concluded. Hearing his comment, the older gentleman shoots a sharp, calculating gaze over the rim of his paper. He quickly softens his expression and agrees, admitting he was wondering when the conflict would finally draw to a close. The young man notes how fortunate it was to end before the royal prince's draft could take a heavier toll. Realizing he hasn't introduced himself, the young man presents himself as Ludger Cherish, prompting the old man to introduce himself simply as Gerard. Ludger humbly downplays his noble standing, inviting Gerard to drop all formal etiquette during their journey together. Ludger asks Gerard about his travel destination, and Gerard shares that he is headed to the imperial capital, Lindebrunn, a popular spot among tourists. Ludger acknowledges the capital's reputation for arcane engineering before revealing that his own destination is Riederbelk. Gerard reacts with surprise when Ludger announces he has secured a teaching position at Siren Academy within the empire. Impressed by his youth, Gerard compliments his talent, though a flustered Ludger humbly insists he barely managed to pass. Gerard encourages him, pointing out that many fail to get accepted at all, and that he should feel proud of his achievement. Ludger offers a grateful smile before shifting the conversation to ask if Gerard has heard the recent rumors about the Civil War. He brings up whispers that the royal princess's victory wasn't delivered by grand mages or mighty knights, but by a legendary wandering mercenary named Machiavelli, whose devastating actions turned the battlefield to ash. Gerard listens intently with a stoic look, offering only a quiet and reserved response to the tale. Noticing how unfazed Gerard appears, Ludger playfully calls him out, prompting the old man to laugh it off as mere hearsay. However, Ludger secretly knows that the rumor is far from baseless. In truth, Machiavelli was merely one of the many aliases Ludger himself had assumed in his past. He had adopted that name while searching the globe for a specific artifact, right before Gerard calls out to him, breaking his train of thought. Gerard warmly asks whether he will be starting his teaching tenure at the academy right away. When Ludger reveals he will be instructing second-year students from the start, Gerard is visibly shocked. Gerard flinches with a sudden glint in his eyes, realizing the young man's abilities must far exceed his initial expectations. Ludger notices Gerard's abrupt change in demeanor and asks in confusion what is wrong. Looking toward the window with growing unease, Gerard stammers as he senses something troubling outside. Before Gerard can even finish his sentence, a sudden disturbance cuts him off completely. A deafening explosion suddenly erupts outside, engulfing the surrounding area in fire and smoke. The shockwave jolts the carriage violently, throwing both men off their seats as screams echo throughout the train. Ludger scrambles to his feet asking if the engines blew, but Gerard firmly insists the train's arcane magical protections make an accidental breakdown impossible. A sharp shattering noise cuts through the air, causing Gerard to freeze in complete horror. Gerard realizes they are under a deliberate attack, leaving Ludger stunned that anyone would dare assault a magic-shielded train. Ludger quickly deduces that armed bandits must be targeting a wealthy merchant or noble on board, alarmed by the brutal explosion. Gerard warns that a powerful mage must be among the attackers to have successfully bypassed the train's magical defenses. Gerard suggests they find a place to hide, but Ludger decides to take the lead to ensure their safety. With a sharp and analytical gaze, Ludger prepares himself for whatever danger lies ahead in the next carriage. As Ludger steps into the long hallway of Car 4, he observes that the entire corridor is completely deserted. Gerard anxiously wonders if the other passengers have locked themselves inside their cabins, prompting Ludger to note that those rooms are also magically reinforced. However, Gerard quickly realizes that since the train's main exterior barrier was breached, the individual cabin protections have likely failed as well. Looking down the empty hallway, Ludger questions why no fleeing passengers have come their way from Car 3, where the explosion occurred. Gerard reasons that if he were one of the bandits, he would have targeted the wealthy passengers in Car 1 first. Ludger nods in agreement, realizing that since the attackers are likely focused on the first-class carriage, they are temporarily safe for now. Just as Gerard suggests fleeing to the caboose to wait for the border patrol, a sudden shadow swings past the window behind them. With a deafening crash, an armed bandit shatters the glass and breaks directly into the passenger corridor. Reacting instantly, Ludger steps in front of the startled Gerard and commands him to stand back. Gerard quickly notices that something is deeply wrong with the intruder, whose bloodshot eyes suggest he is not in a normal state of mind. Without a moment's hesitation, the masked assailant lunges forward, thrusting a sharp dagger directly at Ludger. Ludger swiftly dodges the lethal strike, channeling a surge of crackling blue lightning magic to counterattack. With a precise and powerful discharge, Ludger unleashes an electric shock that blasts the attacker backward. The bandit collapses heavily onto the carpeted floor, completely incapacitated by the sudden magical defense. When Gerard anxiously asks if the intruder is dead, Ludger assures him that he only used enough magic to temporarily paralyze the man. Ignoring Gerard's warnings about the danger, Ludger steps closer to the fallen bandit to interrogate him. Standing over the paralyzed foe, Ludger points his cane downward with absolute authority. He coldly demands to know the true reason behind the violent assault on the train. The bandit can only groan in pain, struggling against the paralyzing shock coursing through his body. Instead of giving a straight answer, the masked man lets out a creepy, mocking chuckle. Unfazed by the defiance, Ludger's expression hardens as he demands that the intruder stop laughing and answer his question. Glaring with intense hatred, the crazed assailant spits out that all filthy nobles and mages like them deserve nothing but death. Before Ludger can act, the assailant yanks open his coat, exposing a chest strapped with high-grade explosives. With a sharp beep, the digital timer on the bomb ticks down to its final second. Ludger's eyes widen in sheer shock as horror sets in. A desperate scream echoes through the hall, urging everyone to get away from him. But it is too late, as a blinding fireball instantly engulfs the entire corridor in a violent blast. The catastrophic explosion rips straight through the side of the rushing train, sending flames and debris tearing through the air. Heavy smoke pours from the wreckage as the train continues clanking along the iron tracks. Struggling through the haze, the gray-haired man groans in pain on the destroyed floor. Coughing through the dust, he frantically looks around and checks to see if Ludger is all right. His eye widens as he realizes the sheer magnitude of the devastation around him. Looking up, he gazes down the ruined hallway, now exposed entirely to the freezing air. A massive section of the luxury train carriage has been completely obliterated into a gaping crater. Rubbing his face in disbelief, he mutters Ludger's name under his breath. Suddenly, he flinches as he senses something wrong with his skin. Reaching up, he feels the synthetic skin on his cheek melting and tearing away from the heat of the explosion. Annoyance flashes across his face as he realizes his elaborate disguise has been permanently ruined. Sighing in frustration, he laments how much of a fortune he spent crafting this disguise mask. Without hesitation, he grips the peeling edge and tears off the realistic mask in one clean pull. Underneath, his true face is revealed, sporting long dark hair and striking blue eyes. He internally groans, wondering why chaos and disaster always seem to follow him wherever he goes. Looking back at the spot where the nobleman vanished, he silently bids the real Ludger cherish a final rest in peace. Observing the destruction, he notes how impressive it was that the fanatic detonated the bomb despite being paralyzed. He concludes that these attackers were unhinged zealots targeting the train itself rather than simple thieves after loot. A panicked train conductor suddenly rushes into the corridor, shouting to check if anyone survived. Reaching the destroyed section, the conductor freezes in absolute horror at the gaping abyss left in the side of the train. The conductor claims that armed bandits attacked the train to reach Car 1, urging everyone to head toward the caboose. He frantically explains that passengers are currently being evacuated and tells the protagonist to head back as well. Without warning, the protagonist lunges forward and tackles the conductor to the floor, grabbing him tightly by the throat. The choked conductor panics in terror, desperately asking why he is suddenly being attacked. Looking down with a menacing glare, the protagonist asks if he really expected such a cheap act to work. He points out that ordinary bandits could never pull off a flawless ambush on a high-speed train in rough mountain terrain. Furthermore, it would be impossible for mere thieves to breach the powerful magical barrier protecting the train. With sharp, calculating eyes, he concludes that the attack could only succeed with an accomplice working from the inside. Pinned to the floor, the fake conductor grits his teeth as his entire cover story is completely exposed. Abandoning his terrified facade, the traitor's expression turns deadly serious as he glares right back. In a swift motion, he pulls out a concealed dagger hidden under his sleeve to strike. Before the blade can move, the protagonist catches his wrist instantly, neutralizing the surprise attack. Realizing he is hopelessly outmatched, the traitor scowls and demands to know who they are and what they want. Refusing to waste breath on answers, the protagonist locks him in a rear hold and forces him to walk forward. However, as they move through the corridor, the protagonist suddenly pauses after sensing something approaching. Hearing a terrifying sound echo through the hallway, his eyes widen in sudden realization of what is about to happen. Acting on instinct, he shoves the traitor directly into the open corridor ahead of him. A sudden storm of gunfire riddles the traitor's body, using him as a meat shield while the protagonist crouches safely. Covering his head, he realizes the enemy was prepared to ruthlessly eliminate their own insider if compromised. With a loud crash, the doorway shatters into pieces as heavy boots step over the fallen spy. A squad of heavily armed mercenaries bursts in, shocked to see someone still standing after their spray of bullets. Standing near the damaged wall, the protagonist turns to face the intruders with an unbothered expression. Determined to finish the job, the mercenaries cock their submachine guns and prepare to fire. The protagonist simply glances over at them, his eyes glowing with calm, lethal intensity. When the mercenary pulls the trigger, a harmless click echoes out, leaving the gunmen completely bewildered. The mercenaries desperately pull their triggers, but only harmless clicks echo through the corridor as their weapons completely fail to fire. One of the gunmen flinches in sudden realization, staring at the mysterious man before them with growing dread. With a sharp whip of his hand, a glowing golden gear-like magic circle begins to materialize over the protagonist's palm. The mercenaries watch in sheer terror as the golden gears spin rapidly, realizing they are facing a powerful mage. They quickly piece together that their firearms were rendered useless by the protagonist's mysterious magic. The protagonist's eyes narrow slightly, sensing an unexpected shift in the surrounding mana. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang rings out as the protagonist's spell is abruptly shattered right before his eyes. He stares in disbelief, realizing someone has just cast a direct counterspell against his magic. From the shadows of the corridor, a cold, mocking voice breaks the silence. A hooded figure crackling with blue lightning steps forward, surprised to find another mage aboard the train. The enemy mage commands the protagonist to surrender, promising a painless death if he complies. Sizing up his opponent, the enemy mage assumes the protagonist must be around the fourth circle since there was no prior intel on him. The protagonist remains completely silent, calmly analyzing his surroundings and calculating his next move. He notes that roughly 10 minutes have passed since the initial explosion rocked the train. Looking out at the stormy mountain pass, he realizes they are far from safety and reinforcements won't be coming. Realizing he has to handle this situation entirely on his own, a plan quickly forms in his mind. Without warning, the protagonist dives straight through the shattered train window and vanishes into the freezing storm. Stunned by the reckless move, the enemy leader barks orders at a mercenary named Hansen to go and check the window. Hansen peers out into the blinding wind and rain, but finds absolutely no trace of the protagonist. Turning back to his commander, the mercenary reports that the target truly seems to have jumped off the speeding train. But before he can even finish his sentence, a blade suddenly pierces straight through the ceiling, killing him instantly. Panic erupts in the hallway as the leader realizes the protagonist is actually lurking directly above them on the roof. The mercenaries are left bewildered, wondering if the protagonist used a levitation spell to pull off such a feat. Terrified by the sheer impossibility of keeping up with a speeding train, the leader screams at them to stop questioning and attack. Knowing that numbers mean nothing against a mage of this caliber, the remaining mercenaries sprint forward to confront their deadly foe. Hoping to buy time, the mercenaries decide to split up, leaving a small group to delay the mage while the rest rush toward Car 1. Without hesitation, the attackers open fire, spraying a barrage of bullets down the narrow train corridor. Sensing the incoming fire, the young mage nimbly dodges through the hallway, annoyed by their relentless assault. Noticing his movement, the mercenaries shout to each other that he is making a run toward the caboose and scramble after him. As he passes through the doorway, the young man swiftly slides a gloved hand across the latch to set up his next move. The instant the mercenaries burst through the entrance, a hidden explosive spell detonates in a violent fiery blast. Reeling from the shockwave, the surviving mercenaries realize to their horror that they fell directly into a calculated trap. The leader stares in utter disbelief, shocked by how insanely practical and cold-blooded this mage's combat tactics are. He realizes this opponent isn't acting like a typical mage, but rather like a seasoned hunter or a ruthless mercenary. Before they can recover, loud metallic clinks and creaks echo through the floorboards beneath their feet. The leader's eye twitches in horror as a grim realization dawns on him. Panic surges through him as he dashes forward, screaming to his men that the mage is uncoupling the train cars to break away. He furiously curses his own foolishness for not realizing sooner that the mage had no intention of wasting time fighting them. Desperate to stop him, the leader sprints full speed down the narrow hallway. Suddenly, a blinding burst of light erupts at the end of the passageway. Outside in the bitter snowstorm, the rear carriage separates completely and begins falling behind on the tracks. From high above, the growing divide between the speeding train and the stranded rear car becomes painfully clear. Left behind in the freezing wind, the leader lets out a rage-filled roar at their humiliating setback. His subordinate curses in frustration, insisting that they cannot abandon the entire operation just because of one man. Gritting his teeth, the leader vows to hunt down and slaughter the young mage, having etched his face into memory. However, before he can even finish his threat, an icy shudder runs down his spine as the air grows unnaturally heavy. A staggering, suffocating wave of pure mana violently saturates the surrounding space. Terrified by the sheer pressure, the mercenaries spin around in a frantic search for the source of this monstrous energy. The leader's eyes widen in absolute terror as he gazes back into the gloom. There, towering over them, stands the young mage surrounded by a magnificent, glowing golden clockwork magic circle. With a cold, piercing glare, the young mage holds out his gloved hand as a magnificent golden clockwork spell unleashes. The leader's mind reels in utter shock, unable to comprehend how the mage suddenly appeared right behind them. Panic sets in as he realizes they have stepped directly into a deadly, calculated trap. Without hesitation, the mage slams his spell into the floor, detonating a wave of destructive golden magic. Lethal beams of golden light slice down the dark corridor, cutting down the helpless attackers instantly. A blinding flash of magic consumes the entire train car in a searing burst of energy. As the destructive light surges past, the leader desperately screams out to his men. Terrified, he tries to order an immediate retreat before his voice is cut off by the light. With a gentle flick of his gloved wrist, the young mage clears away the lingering haze. As the smoke settles, he stands unbothered amidst the charred, lifeless bodies of the assassins. Gazing across the silent hallway, the young mage calmly wonders if the battle is finally over. To his surprise, the heavily scorched leader staggers upright, missing an arm, as the mage dryly notes his survival. Coughing up blood, the mutilated assassin leader demands to know why he slaughtered his comrades. The leader accuses him of lacking a conscience, claiming his men gave their lives to change the world. Interrupting his frantic speech, the mage scoffs in utter amusement at the assassin's words. He mockingly calls the leader completely insane, taking the remaining survivor off guard. The mage coldly points out that they were the ones who ambushed him with lethal intent in the first place. He asks what right a murderer has to preach to him about morality or changing the world for the better. Looking at the blood-stained train windows, he demands to know if the leader preaches the same nonsense to his own innocent victims. Reminding him of his previous death threats, the mage completely dismisses his hypocritical accusations. Adjusting his gloved hand, he admits that he originally planned to walk away without any bloodshed. However, that peaceful option vanished the moment they saw his true face. Knowing they would hunt him endlessly, the mage explains that he can only sleep peacefully knowing they are all dead. Before the leader can even finish his scream, a massive spike of solid ice erupts right through his body. With the final threat permanently silenced, the young mage stares ahead with cold, unyielding eyes. Heavy armored boots step forward with deliberate weight onto the blood-red carpet. A heroic knight clad in white armor emerges through the shattered ice, her long ponytail swaying softly. The young mage stands beside the frozen remains of the threat, calmly asking if she is all right. Looking over the slain assailants bisected by ice, he reassures her that the immediate danger has passed. With a proud smile and eagles soaring behind her, she boldly declares that the Knights of Cold Steel have arrived. Meanwhile, in another car, heavy, rhythmic banging echoes loudly against the closed doors. Masked terrorists open fire in a frenzy, stunned that the Knights managed to approach using levitation magic despite the harsh weather. Unfazed by the barrage, a knight raises his arm, effortlessly deflecting every bullet off a glowing blue barrier. Gathering condensed mana around his body, the knight prepares to launch an explosive counterattack. In a flash of light, he dashes directly into the middle of the armed squad at breakneck speed. The lead gunman gasps in utter shock as the knight appears right before his eyes. With a brutal sweeping blow, the knight smashes through the ambushers in one fluid motion. He glides past the terror-stricken gunman, leaving the man wide-eyed with horror at his sheer power. A painful scream echoes down the corridor, followed by a heavy thud as the final gunman collapses. Tapping his earpiece, the knight calmly reports that cabin 2 is completely clear of hostiles. In another car, a fellow knight checks in, confirming cabin 1 is secure and the passengers are safe. Receiving the reports over comms, the vice captain listens closely as her team confirms the entire train is secured. Pleased with the result, Vice Captain Veronica commends her squad and orders them to escort the passengers safely to the next stop. Shortly after, the train pulls into Reederbelk station, where relieved travelers begin stepping onto the sunlit platform. Inside a private compartment, the young mage sits comfortably with his legs crossed, gazing quietly out the window. Veronica steps into his cabin, asking if he sustained any injuries during the sudden terrorist raid. He politely assures her that he is fine thanks to her knights, explaining he was merely lost in thought. Placing a gloved hand over her chest with a confident smile, she formally introduces herself as Veronica DeVille. As he begins to introduce himself in return, he suddenly pauses, caught off guard by something outside. Hearing heavy footsteps approaching down the hallway, Veronica glances toward the door, wondering what is happening. An officer approaches Veronica, asking if she is in charge of the Knights, to which she introduces herself as Vice Captain Veronica DeVille. Flashing his badge, Inspector Lemlis introduces himself from the Metropolitan Police Agency and explains he is investigating the train attack near Arrett Mountain. Veronica confirms that her knights eliminated every single attacker, earning Lemlis's praise, though he quickly adds a troubling caveat. Overhearing from inside the compartment, the young man flinches as Lemlis notes that something about the official report was deeply suspicious. Lemlis reasons that because this is an arcane-engineered train, even with a wizard present, the attackers breached its defenses far too effortlessly. Realizing the dark implication behind his statement, Veronica's eyes widen in sudden shock. The detective reveals his belief that an insider aboard the train acted as an accomplice to assist the terrorists. Pondering the theory, Veronica admits it makes sense, though Lemlis clarifies it currently remains a working possibility. Lemlis assures her that once all passenger identities are verified, everyone will be sent on their way, which Veronica agrees to. Turning back inside, Veronica tells the protagonist that as long as he remains honest during the check, there will be no issues. On the surface, the young man maintains a serene and polite expression. However, internally, sheer panic sets in as he realizes he is in deep trouble. Although the identity and ticket of the real Gerard are fully legitimate, a catastrophic problem remains. Because he is currently occupying a young body, he looks nothing like the 40-year-old man recorded on Gerard's ticket. He realizes that a simple background check will immediately expose his fake identity, leading straight to execution or severe torture. Knowing that police knights are surrounding the train outside, escaping on foot is completely out of the question. Outside, railway conductors and authorities are already strictly cross-checking every single document. To make matters worse, Vice Captain Veronica is notorious for showing absolute, unyielding cruelty to anyone suspected of wickedness. Although she offers him a pleasant smile right now, he knows it is only a momentary facade. The second she suspects him of deception, she will ruthlessly eliminate him on the spot. A voice suddenly breaks his spiraling thoughts as Lemlis notices his tension and asks if he is all right. Holding the passenger log, Lemlis reassures him not to feel overly pressured, explaining he only needs to check his ID. Lemlis politely asks to see his ticket, and the young man hands it over to the detective. Reviewing the passenger roster for room 403, Lemlis sees two names listed: a young man named Ludger Cherish and an older man named Gerard. Narrowing his eyes with sudden suspicion, Lemlis glances up from the paper and sharply asks where the second guest is. The young man explains with a tense expression that Gerard was swept away by a bomb blast after the attack, falling off a cliff while the train was passing the Arat Mountains. Lemlis narrows his eyes, letting out a suspicious hum as he carefully processes this explanation. The protagonist nervously gulps, hoping his fabricated story holds up under the investigator's intense scrutiny. Just as the tension peaks, a voice suddenly calls out from behind, halting the interrogation. Veronica steps forward to declare that the young man was never a suspect to begin with, catching Lemlis completely off guard. She points out that he was actively fighting the terrorists before the guards even arrived, making it illogical for him to be an insider. Lemlis is stunned to hear this, realizing his suspicions might have been entirely misplaced. Nodding in understanding, Lemlis quickly rubs his chin and apologizes for his rudeness, begging for the man's forgiveness. Glancing back down at the roster, Lemlis finally reads the name of the passenger sitting before him: Ludger. The sudden realization of who this man is leaves both of the investigators completely dumbfounded. Both Lemlis and Veronica flinch in utter shock as they realize this young man is actually the newly appointed professor at the prestigious Siren Academy. Their suspicion instantly turns into sparkling admiration, leaving the protagonist feeling slightly awkward under their intense gazes. Seeing that his cover identity is working perfectly, a subtle, confident smile plays on the protagonist's lips. Confirming their realization, the protagonist stands up and firmly grabs his leather suitcase. Introducing himself with absolute poise, he tips his top hat and confirms his identity as the new professor, Ludger Cherish. Outside the grand station, Lemlis apologizes once more, but the protagonist politely assures him that his journey was quite comfortable. When Lemlis insists on escorting him to Siren to honor someone shaping the Empire's future, the protagonist politely declines. In his mind, however, he bluntly rejects the offer, knowing that staying close to the authorities would only jeopardize his secret. Outwardly, he smoothly explains that he has personal matters to tend to first, prompting Lemlis to reluctantly back down. Bidding them farewell, he turns to Veronica and tells her that though their meeting was brief, it was a pleasure. Veronica beams with a warm smile, expressing her hope that fate will bring them together again. She stands silently in the plaza, watching as his tall figure slowly blends into the bustling city crowd. With steady, confident strides, the protagonist walks away from the station and his close call with the law. Under the vast open sky, he internally celebrates, ecstatic that he actually managed to pull off the ultimate deception. Looking back on the real Ludger Cherish, he silently apologizes to the deceased man, thanking him for inadvertently saving his life with this identity. Fortunately, the primitive camera technology of this world makes it nearly impossible to distinguish between his face and the real Ludgers in a photograph, cementing his disguise. Believing the worst of the danger has passed, he plans to lay low and quietly craft a brand new identity to disappear completely. But his relief is instantly shattered when a voice calls out the name Ludger Cherish, causing him to freeze in sudden panic. An approaching figure reveals they recognized him after spotting him speaking with the knights earlier at the station. The gentleman introduces himself as Wolford, an employee from Siren Academy who came to personally greet him out of concern over the train attack. Expressing his relief at the professor's safety, Wolford politely invites him to step inside the carriage so they can depart for the academy. Realizing he has no easy way out of this sudden encounter, he is forced to play along despite the mounting pressure. The carriage rattles down the cobblestone streets, carrying him toward a destination he never intended to visit. Sitting at the reins, Wolford guides a magnificent, steam-powered mechanical horse that propels them forward. Inside the carriage, he sits in silence, clasped hands resting against his face as he desperately calculates his next move. He internally panics, realizing that Siren Academy sending a personal escort is a massive complication, especially since his driver seems far from ordinary. Noting Wolford's imposing build and how stealthily he approached, he deduces that the old man must be a highly trained knight in disguise. Making a run for it now with a weak excuse would only trigger the knight's suspicion and lead to an immediate chase. He decides his safest option is to maintain the facade of Ludger Cherish and let the academy serve as his temporary shield. Since his original identity of Gerard is officially dead, he is essentially a ghost with no official existence to fall back on. Without a registered identity, he realizes that if he were to be captured or killed, no one in the world would even notice his disappearance. To survive, he must fully commit to the role of Ludger Cherish, biding his time until a perfect opportunity to escape presents itself. The carriage finally stops as the massive iron gates creak open, and Wolford announces their arrival at the academy. He gazes out at the breathtaking, sprawling campus of Siren Academy, a place of immense scale and grandeur. He is completely stunned by the sheer size of the academy, realizing it is far more massive than he ever anticipated. Wolford instructs him to leave his luggage behind, offering to lead him directly to the academy's president. The towering white spires of the main building loom ahead, showcasing the magnificent Gothic architecture of the institution. He walks alone down a colossal, empty hallway, the intricate floor patterns stretching out toward a set of grand double doors. Stepping up to the entrance, he introduces himself as Ludger Cherish, announcing that he has arrived for his requested meeting. He enters the grand office, finding himself face to face with the academy's president, who sits waiting for him at a desk bathed in light. Sitting beneath a shadow with her hands neatly clasped, a subtle, intriguing smile appears on the woman's face. Revealing herself as Elisa Willow, the president of Siren Academy, she warmly welcomes Ludger into her office. Bright sunlight streams in through the grand, gilded arched window of the spacious room. As they face each other across the desk, Elisa inquires about his well-being after the terrorist incident, but Ludger calmly brushes it off as nothing serious thanks to the knights. She claps her hands together cheerfully, admitting she is just relieved her newest professor did not get hurt and ruin the academy's reputation. Listening to her blunt concern for the school's image, Ludger realizes that this woman is far from ordinary. He feels an odd, underlying sensation lingering in the room and wonders if his instincts are playing tricks on him. Staring into her golden eyes, he internally questions whether the real Ludger had ever met her in person, or if she suspects his identity. However, Elisa immediately dispels his doubts by gushing about how handsome he is for their very first face-to-face meeting, letting him breathe a quiet sigh of relief. After he dryly thanks her for the compliment, she eagerly insists that the students will be thrilled to have him when classes start. Steering back to business, She reaches across the desk and presents him with an official document to make everything formal. As Ludger takes the paper, she outlines the 2-year contract terms along with provided room and board, while he secretly plans to resign as quickly as possible. But his eyes widen in shock the second he sees the staggering monthly salary offer of 30 imperial gold coins. Doing the rapid math in his head, he realizes that translates to tens of millions in common currency and an absurd fortune in his former world's money. Observing his reaction, Elisa leans forward with a satisfied smirk and asks if the offer meets his standards. Ludger forces a cool facade, playing it off while admitting that the pay is certainly not bad at all. Inside his mind, however, he is screaming in joy over having hit the absolute jackpot. Covering his mouth to maintain a straight face, he reminds himself to stay grounded since such astronomical pay comes with terrifyingly high expectations. He worries whether he can truly hold his own amidst a sea of arrogant, genius professors waiting to judge him. Looking back at the president, he knows that turning down the job now would only make him look entirely suspicious. Realizing he has backed himself into a corner, he accepts that backing out is no longer an option. Reminding himself that deceit, posturing, and keeping composure are his true specialties, he confidently agrees to sign the deal. Backed by real-life experience and extensive knowledge, he reassures himself that faking his role as an elite professor is entirely within his capability. Satisfied with his decision, Elisa reaches out her hand, welcoming him as official faculty of the academy. Grasping her hand in a firm handshake, Ludger steels his resolve, telling himself he only needs to survive at Siren for 2 short years. He tells himself that if he can just survive for 2 years, he will finally be free from all his burdens. Later that night, we see the beautiful, multi-story brick house provided for him as his official residence. Sitting on a lavish sofa, Ludger notes that there are 3 weeks left before the semester begins, giving him plenty of time to prepare. He lets out a soft groan, completely surprised that the academy went as far as to grant him an entire private house. Leaning his head back with a sigh, he contemplates his next role, wondering how well he will play the part of an academy professor. Looking off into the distance, he reflects on the fact that it has already been 27 years since he first arrived in this fantasy world. Reincarnated with only the memories of his past life and no special abilities, he was left with terrible parents and had to learn how to survive entirely on his own from a young age. Despite facing countless hardships and narrow escapes, he managed to scrape by, never expecting he would one day become a professor at the prestigious Siren Academy. He reminds himself that this is merely a fake job, or rather, a position he was practically forced into accepting due to his circumstances. Still, he acknowledges that regardless of how it happened, he desperately needed a brand new identity to lay low. Fortunately, the real Ludger Cherish possessed the perfect background and conditions for him to easily conceal his true self. The real Ludger came from a fallen noble family in a tiny kingdom, had no living relatives, and only kept extremely formal, distant contact with his acquaintances. Realizing that almost no one would ever recognize the difference, he gulps, finding this to be the absolute perfect disguise. Standing up from his seat, he decides his immediate priority is to plan his upcoming lectures and get a proper lay of the land around the academy. Suddenly, a loud growl erupts from his stomach, reminding him that he hasn't eaten a single bite since the chaotic train incident. Deciding that his investigation can wait until tomorrow, he looks out at the starry night sky, wondering where the cafeteria is located. Sometime later, we find Ludger dressed in his elegant professor attire, sitting at an outdoor cafe while reviewing some paperwork over a cup of coffee. Taking a slow sip, he notes that 2 weeks have already flown by, but thankfully, his preparations for the classes have gone incredibly smoothly. With only 1 week left before the semester officially begins, all that is left for him to do is execute his plan. Noticing other guests starting to arrive at the cafe, he decides it's time to head back and prepare for orientation, just as a hooded figure suddenly pulls up a chair. The hooded figure sits down and expresses great relief, mentioning how worried they were that something terrible had happened to him. Ludger freezes mid-sip, a drop of cold sweat running down his cheek as he realizes he has been approached by someone from his dangerous past. The two sit in tense silence at the outdoor cafe, surrounded by empty tables on the quiet street. The hooded guest nervously asks why he has been completely out of touch for the past 2 weeks, revealing that the other members are highly curious about his moves as the First Order. Maintaining a cold, dark expression, Ludger quietly sips his tea, realizing that his attempt at a peaceful life is already being threatened by the secret organization he belongs to. Ludger calmly lifts his teacup, maintaining his composure despite the sudden intrusion into his quiet life. He coldly explains that he had matters of his own to investigate, internally realizing that this dangerous organization has indeed tracked down his exact location. To be more precise, they didn't come for him specifically, but rather for the identity of the man named Ludger Cherish. The hooded agent shrinks back in fear, nervously explaining that the recent train terrorist attack was merely an unforeseen accident caused by rebel forces. Ludger presses further, claiming he needed more details regarding Siren Academy, which catches the agent off guard since they had already sent him those files. With a smooth lie, Ludger states he merely wanted to cross-reference and verify the data, prompting a quick, submissive nod of understanding from the hooded messenger. Behind his icy exterior, however, Ludger is internally sweating bullets, completely baffled by the bizarre situation he has found himself in. Deciding to play along to avoid raising any suspicion, Ludger shifts the conversation and asks if the agent completed their assigned task. The agent proudly reveals that they successfully assassinated all of their targets at the academy and even eliminated a traitor within their own ranks, causing Ludger to silently flinch. The hooded figure describes the gruesome execution of the traitor in chilling detail, explaining how their limbs were ground up and fed to wild dogs. With a sinister smile visible under the hood, the agent declares it to be the absolute perfect end for anyone who dares to betray them. Hearing this brutal confession sends shivers down Ludger's spine as a terrible feeling of dread begins to wash over him. He places his teacup back down with a slight clatter, desperately trying to steady his nerves and keep his composure intact. The sudden noise of the cup hitting the saucer makes the hypersensitive agent wince in sheer terror. Believing she has offended her superior, she immediately bows her head in panic, apologizing profusely for not reporting the details sooner. Surprised by her extreme submissiveness, Ludger tells her to forget about it and asks why she requested this sudden meeting in the first place. When she mentions they hadn't heard from him in 2 weeks, Ludger cuts her off with a cold, intimidating question, asking if she thought she could act on her own during such a critical time. The terrified agent instantly cowers and apologizes again, only to be met with a stern command from Ludger to remain silent. Slamming his hand onto the table, Ludger harshly criticizes her highly conspicuous cloak, calling her choice of clothing offensive. He demands to know if she wants to draw unwanted attention, while internally confirming that she is indeed terrified of his every single movement. Watching her shake uncontrollably, Ludger realizes that she is absolutely petrified of the fearsome reputation of the real Ludger Cherish. Sighing deeply at the stress of it all, Ludger rubs his forehead and asks for an update on how many of their organization's members have gathered in the area. She quickly reports that 31 Third Order members and 7 Second Order members have successfully infiltrated their target locations. She adds that the other elite First Orders have already arrived and settled in, to which Ludger calmly replies that his inspection is complete and prepares to leave. The agent submissively accepts his departure, telling him he can simply join them at their designated meeting spot later, causing Ludger to briefly pause. The hooded agent's eyes widen in sheer panic under his glasses as he realizes he just made a grave slip of the tongue by suggesting Ludger could simply come to their meeting. Ludger slowly turns his head back, his icy gaze piercing right through the agent as he questions how someone of such low standing could dare speak to him in that manner. He demands to know if a mere low-ranking agent honestly believes they have the authority to order a First Order member like him to come and go as they please. Terrified out of his mind, the agent begins to shake and stammer out a desperate apology, but Ludger instantly cuts him off, refusing to hear any excuses. Ludger coldly asserts that he alone will decide when a rendezvous is necessary, making it clear he will only coordinate with those who are at his level or higher. Trembling from head to toe, the agent clutches his knees and asks in a shaky voice if Ludger is referring to the elusive Zero Order when he mentions someone of a higher rank. With a firm step forward, Ludger confirms his statement, warning the agent never to bother him with such trivial matters again unless the command comes directly from the Zero Order. As Ludger's footsteps fade into the distance, the agent can only watch his retreating figure in absolute awe and terror, completely overwhelmed by his commanding presence. Meanwhile, Ludger is internally panicking, cursing himself for having to put on such a dangerous, high-stakes act just to keep his cover intact. He realizes that the real Ludger was far more ruthless and dangerous than he initially anticipated, making his impersonation incredibly risky. He desperately tries to piece together the clues, wondering what kind of assassination targets they were planning at the academy and what secrets they discussed with the traitor. The sheer absurdity and extreme danger of the situation weigh heavily on him, forcing him to realize how deep of a conspiracy he has stumbled into. Deciding that his priority is to escape this perilous encounter, he prepares to leave, but suddenly stops in his tracks as a new thought strikes him. He pauses for a second, realizing there is a crucial detail he might have overlooked regarding the communication between the real Ludger and the organization. A sudden wave of realization washes over him as he begins to connect the dots of the letters he found. He recalls the mysterious letters and wonders if, by some chance, there was a hidden pattern to their exchanges. He ponders what the real Ludger's protocol was for summoning the agents and how they were supposed to recognize his commands. He admits to himself that he had completely overlooked this critical detail, realizing he doesn't know the secret signal to call them. To cover his tracks, he asks the agent if he really needs to spell out the obvious, prompting a panicked gasp from the agent who quickly bids him farewell. Later, back in his room, he examines the letters on his desk, noting the bizarre details about a ruined family and a target with no living relatives. He looks over the profile of the youngest fourth circle mage who managed to become a professor at the prestigious Siren Academy. Clenching his fist in frustration, he curses himself for not being suspicious of the incredibly convenient circumstances surrounding this teaching position from the very beginning. It dawns on him that the reason the real Ludger's background and credentials seemed so flawlessly ideal was because the entire identity was a fabricated lie designed for this very infiltration. The real Ludger would never have been able to sneak into the academy under his actual identity, necessitating the creation of a perfect, untraceable persona. He concludes that all the letters exchanged back and forth were actually a clever cover, serving as a highly secure method for transmitting encrypted messages. Overwhelmed by the shocking depth of the conspiracy, he grabs his head in utter frustration, realizing the massive trouble he has just walked into. With a heavy thud, he collapses straight onto the floor, completely drained by the sheer weight of his new reality. Lying flat on his back amidst scattered papers, he laments his terrible luck, cursing the fact that he chose such a dangerously volatile identity to steal. As the pages of his notebook flutter, he begins to closely examine the strange, coded letters left behind by the original Ludger. Sitting back at his desk, he deduces that the letters were written in the obscure Quoden language, which explains why the sentence structures seem so incredibly awkward. Translating the secret script, he uncovers the first directive: to infiltrate Siren Academy as a new professor, gain their absolute trust, and await further instructions. Staring at the documents, he realizes that surviving his teaching duties at the academy is no longer his only major concern. Stress washes over him as he tightly clenches his fist, the reality of his incredibly precarious situation truly sinking in. He clutches his head in disbelief, finding it absolutely ridiculous that a high-ranking executive of a powerful secret society could get himself killed so easily in a random terrorist attack. He imagines how absurdly careless the original Ludger must have been, planting dozens of spies inside the academy yet failing to prioritize his own survival. Letting out a deep, exhausted sigh, he reminds himself that there is no use arguing with a dead man, and that he must deal with the hand he has been dealt. He realizes he is now trapped between two massive factions, the prestigious Siren Academy and the mysterious secret society, neither of which can ever discover his true identity. Narrowing his eyes with sharp focus, he considers that perhaps making contact with this shadow group today was actually a blessing in disguise. He ponders the structure of this organization, recalling their hierarchy and the mysterious figure who sits at the absolute top. Based on what he gathered, the society is strictly divided from the elusive Zero Order down to the Third Order, though he still has no leads on the Supreme Leader. Even so, simply uncovering the existence of this rigid hierarchy is an incredibly massive victory for his survival strategy. His immediate priority now is to identify the other high-ranking members of the First Order who might be lurking in the shadows. If any of those high-ranking members were close acquaintances of the real Ludger, they would instantly recognize him as an imposter, making his current situation highly dangerous. He decides that his absolute best path forward is to pit the two forces against each other, using the Academy's might to wipe out the secret society. No matter how powerful or ancient this shadow organization claims to be, they are ultimately just players on a massive chessboard. If he can successfully bait the formidable forces of Siren Academy into action, the secret society won't stand a single chance. However, pulling this off means he must masterfully leak information to both sides without ever raising suspicion, a perilous tightrope walk that will test his limits. He exhales a long, tense breath, trying to calm his racing mind and prepare for the grueling path ahead. Looking down at his notes, he prepares himself for a grueling 2-year stint where every single day will be a battle of wits. Meanwhile, the grand and majestic spires of Siren Academy stand tall under the bright morning sun, completely unaware of the dangerous double agent who has just entered their gates. As students crowd the grand hallways of the academy, excited murmurs and idle chatter fill the morning air. Inside the massive, sunlit lecture hall, the second-year students begin filing into their seats, preparing for their upcoming class. One of the students eagerly asks his peers if they have heard the latest rumors circulating through the academy. He reveals that a brand new professor has been appointed to teach the highly anticipated second-year course on materialization and element manipulation. Flora listens quietly as they gossip about how the previous professor was forced to resign in disgrace after being utterly outskilled by a student in front of the entire class. Her blonde classmate whispers that the gossip is clearly about her, but Flora quickly brushes it off, claiming she didn't do anything extraordinary. Flora defends her actions by stating she was merely pointing out a flaw in the former professor's technique, though her friend still finds the situation incredibly daunting. Meanwhile, other students discuss the impressive credentials of their new instructor, noting his background as a former military officer and his numerous published works. However, one student leans in with a smug grin, ready to drop a piece of juicy gossip about the new teacher's background. He reveals the shocking truth that this highly decorated new professor actually hails from a disgraced, ruined family. While the others laugh and assume the class will be an easy pass, Flora finds the gossip incredibly dull and sighs in disappointment. Suddenly, the door slides open, and a pair of sharp, black leather boots step firmly into the classroom. A tall, imposing figure with long, dark hair strides purposefully up the stairs toward the front podium. With a sudden, loud bang, his gloved hand slams down onto the wooden desk, instantly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Looking out over the silent hall, he coldly introduces himself as their new professor, Ludger Cherish. His piercing, glowing blue eyes sweep across the rows of students, sending a chill through the entire room. Feeling the heavy pressure of his gaze, several students flinch and gulp nervously, instantly regretting their earlier mockery. Standing tall with his hands behind his back, Ludger notes that while they are still in the course registration period, he has an important announcement to make. He explains that his course will transcend mere theory, focusing heavily on the actual practical applications of materialization magic. When he adds that first-year students are also welcome to enroll in this advanced class, a wave of confused murmurs ripples through the desks. Raising a hand to silence the chatter, Ludger assures them that despite opening the doors to younger students, the standard of his lectures will not be lowered. From the crowd, a hand shoots up as a student boldly asks why he would even consider allowing first-years into such a high-level course. The question comes from an elegant, blonde-haired student who stares up at him with an intense, questioning gaze. Recognizing her face from somewhere in his memories, Ludger calmly responds that as an educator, he believes all students deserve an equal opportunity to learn, regardless of their grade level. Undeterred by his answer, she sharply notes that if he fails to explain the concepts properly, it will be impossible for any of them to truly understand. Ludger boldly declares that spoiling the surprise wouldn't be any fun, challenging her to attend his next lecture if she truly wants answers. Before wrapping things up, he decides to leave the entire room with one final, chilling warning. He makes it clear that being a new professor doesn't mean his class will be an easy pass, sending a wave of anxiety through the students. With a terrifyingly cold gaze, he promises to make anyone who underestimates him deeply regret their complacency. He outright tells them that if they want an easy ride, they should simply stay far away from his classroom. Internally, however, Ludger is secretly hoping his harsh words will scare them away, as fewer students would make his teaching job much easier. He reasons that the prideful second-years would hate sharing a room with freshmen, especially after being told how brutal the curriculum will be. Satisfied with his intimidating speech, Ludger concludes his introduction and asks the silent hall if anyone has any questions. The students are left whispering in awe, wondering if his intense aura stems from his military background and his rumored status as a fourth circle mage. Though curiosity burns wildly within them, the sheer pressure in the room makes them hesitate. No one dares to raise their hand, completely paralyzed by his overwhelming presence. Amidst the terrified crowd, one blue-haired student simply smirks, seemingly amused by the new professor's performance. Seeing that the entire class has been effectively silenced, Ludger officially brings the opening ceremony to a close. He turns and walks out, his steady footsteps echoing down the grand hallway. Once alone, Ludger admits to himself that he didn't expect such absolute silence, hoping someone would have at least asked a basic question about him. While it's safer for his hidden identity that they didn't pry, he laments that all the fake background answers he prepared went completely to waste. Suddenly, a paranoid thought crosses his mind, making him wonder if the students were actually ignoring him to show disrespect. He begins to overthink, worrying that he might have been far too harsh and ended up deeply wounding their pride instead of just setting boundaries. His train of thought is abruptly cut short when he senses someone approaching him. He passes by two students who immediately freeze up, completely terrified by his mere presence. Another student quickly scurries out of his path, desperate to avoid making eye contact with the scary new professor. The entire hallway falls dead silent as students part like the Red Sea just to let him walk through. Ludger realizes with a shock that his fears were completely wrong. They aren't looking down on him. They are absolutely terrified of him. Just then, a cheerful voice calls out to him, asking if he is indeed the newly appointed professor, Ludger Cherish. She introduces herself as Selena, a fellow rookie professor who is delighted to finally make his acquaintance. Ludger politely greets Selena but gets straight to the point, asking how he can assist her, which catches the nervous rookie professor off guard. Fidgeting slightly under his gaze, Selena musters up the courage to ask if he has had lunch yet. The scene shifts outside to a magnificent sunlit academy building where more introductions are taking place. A jovial man named Brino introduces himself as a golem magic teacher, while a confident woman named Merida explains she teaches charms and visions. Ludger introduces himself as the materialization professor, wondering if this gathering is just a friendly icebreaker for the new staff. When Merida flatters him by calling him handsome, Ludger politely thanks her, unaware of the hostile glare coming from a blue-haired man nearby. This glasses-wearing man stares intensely at Ludger, a sharp spark of magical energy flashing in his eyes. Sensing the heavy gaze, Ludger calmly looks back to analyze the source of this sudden hostility. The man quickly turns his head away with a cold, dismissive motion. Merida leans in to whisper that the arrogant man is Chris Benamor, a proud noble who looks down on commoners like them. Glancing at the group, Ludger notes that the new professors consist of one nobleman, one member of a ruined family, and 3 commoners. He reminds himself that regardless of social status, all of them are highly capable experts in their respective magical fields. However, this realization brings a dark thought. One of these seemingly innocent colleagues could secretly be a high-ranking member of the Black Mountain. The vague clue about the spy arriving early leaves Ludger groaning in frustration, unable to trust a single person around him. Meanwhile, Chris Benamor scoffs, loudly declaring that he has no interest in staying around any longer. Walking away from the courtyard, Chris snidely tells them not to drag him down with their commoner antics. He pauses to direct his sharpest, most venomous glare directly at Ludger. Chris warns Ludger not to show off, reminding him that he is nothing more than a fallen nobleman from a ruined house. Merida is left deeply annoyed by the noble's blatant disrespect, but she tells Ludger not to let the insults get to him. Ludger assures her he is perfectly fine, prompting Merida to suggest that the rest of them head out for lunch together. As they walk toward the grand dining hall, Ludger finds comfort in the simple fact that he won't have to eat his first meal alone. Later that evening, a quiet, crescent moon rises over the dark towers of the academy, casting a peaceful glow. Suddenly, a brilliant blue magic circle activates on a wooden desk, humming with mystical energy. As the light intensifies, a secret message begins to transmit, discussing the rumors surrounding the mysterious Ludger Cherish. A hand taps the glowing screen as the files reveal his fabricated achievements, listing him as a brilliant fourth circle military mage and cryptid hunter. Looking at the glowing magical terminal, the student can't help but wonder if all those incredible rumors about the new professor are actually true. Clenching their hands in determination over the glowing interface, they realize they cannot allow the First Order's class to be ruined under any circumstances. They tap the screen, resolved to recruit as many students as possible to sign up for his lecture. Word quickly spreads among the student body, raising eyebrows as first years realize they are actually allowed to register for this advanced course. Believing they have absolutely nothing to lose, many decide to take the plunge and sign up. When the first day of class finally arrives, a firm step echoes down the hallway. Ludger walks toward the lecture hall, wondering how many students actually remained after his intimidating warnings. He is confident his class will be empty, since he specifically warned them that his course would be a total landmine. He reasons that if anyone did register, it was only because they had no other choice after being locked out of other classes. Sliding the door open, he expects to see 30 students at the absolute most. Inside, the students are already busy whispering about the mysterious post they read online. But as he looks out over the lecture hall, he is greeted by a massive, packed crowd of eager faces. Ludger is completely frozen in shock, his usual calm composure instantly shattered. He panics internally, unable to comprehend why all 80 seats in the lecture hall are completely filled. Even worse, first years are sitting right alongside upperclassmen, completely mesmerized by the intense military aura he projects just by walking in. Ludger begins to suspect a conspiracy, wondering if someone is actively trying to sabotage him, completely unaware of his secret supporter cheering him on. Trying to keep his cool, he clenches his fist and realizes he might have severely underestimated the resolve of these academy students. He reminds himself that Siren Academy houses the absolute elite from across the entire continent. His harsh warnings must have backfired, accidentally igniting their fierce competitive spirits instead of scaring them away. Letting out a quiet sigh, he realizes there is no turning back now. Left with no other options, he must play his part perfectly. Standing tall at the podium, he introduces himself as Professor Ludger Cherish, announcing that he will be teaching the overall process of materialization. He resolves to put on a flawless performance and teach them to the best of his abilities. Immediately, a student raises his hand to ask if the overall process refers to the 4 major specialties of magic. Ludger narrows his eyes, locking his gaze onto the questioning student as the first challenge of his teaching career begins. Ludger firmly establishes his authority, warning the flinching student that questions are only permitted with his permission, though he will overlook it just this once. He warns the class that future disruptions or challenges to his authority will result in point deductions, though they will also have chances to earn rewards through hard work. Taking a step forward, the professor decides to answer the question anyway, confirming that he indeed intends to teach the entire process of the 4 magical specialties. These core disciplines begin with materialization and elemental manipulation, followed by telekinesis and fortification, completing the foundation of their magical education. Together, these 4 distinct specialties form the very essence of conjuration magic. A student anxiously taps their finger on the desk, highly skeptical that a single new professor could possibly teach all 4 complex fields. Flora watches intently, silently suspecting that the new instructor is merely exaggerating his capabilities. To capture their attention on day 1, Ludger raises his wand, promising to demonstrate something truly captivating. He begins manifesting a 3rd circle fire spell called Rolling Flame, explaining how it combines heat, combustion, compression, and expansion. With effortless grace, he completes the intricate magic circle, causing a brilliant flame to blaze to life. Flashing a confident smirk, he declares that his method will allow them to cast this very formula 3 times faster than standard casting times. The classroom immediately erupts into murmurs, with students questioning if such a massive reduction in casting time is even physically possible. A blonde student glances back at Flora, asking if she believes the professor's bold claim. Flora remains doubtful, noting that altering the speed without changing the fundamental structure of the formula should be an absolute impossibility. She reasons that he would need a pre-prepared medium like a magic scroll or memory reverberation, both of which carry severe limitations. If he relies on such cheap tricks to speed up his magic, she knows she will see right through it. Leaning back with a smug expression, she prepares to be thoroughly disappointed by this new instructor. Seeing the intense curiosity in their eyes, Ludger decides to open the floor to a few questions. Eager students like Alex and Dahlia quickly raise their hands to ask if he truly improved the technique or just shortened the casting time. Ludger clarifies that tampering with a completed formula would essentially turn it into an entirely different spell. Instead, he raises his fist to emphasize that his goal is to accelerate the manifestation speed while keeping the original formula completely intact. A voice calls out to him, breaking the brief silence in the lecture hall. Flora raises her hand high, flatly declaring that what he is proposing is completely impossible. Ludger silently locks his gaze onto her, meeting her challenge with a cool, unshakable stare. Raising her hand high, Flora introduces herself as a second-year student named Flora Lumos, preparing to voice her objections. She looks the new professor dead in the eye, flatly declaring that his proposition is completely impossible while Ludger stares back in silence. The classroom immediately erupts into hushed whispers, with students realizing Flora is finally speaking up and predicting that the new teacher is already dead meat. Ludger calmly retorts that while he didn't ask for comments, he is curious to hear why she believes it cannot be done. Flora explains that reducing a formula's casting time requires repeated practice and proficiency, accusing the professor of claiming to do the impossible. She firmly states her disbelief in his claims, while Ludger listens intently with his hand resting on his chin. Ludger counters by asking what if he is attempting something entirely new that has never been tried in the history of magic. The sheer audacity of his claim leaves Flora utterly dumbfounded as she struggles to process his words. Turning his back to the lecture hall, Ludger explains that while traditional magic has stagnated for years, science has rapidly advanced to threaten its very existence. He looks back to clarify that he isn't saying science is superior, but rather that magic still has plenty of room to evolve. With absolute certainty, Ludger tells her she is wrong, boldly declaring that he will be the first to actually improve magic. Flora is taken aback by his shameless confidence, wondering how he can be so incredibly certain of himself. Deciding that actions speak louder than words, Ludger conjures a brilliant magic circle and asks Flora if she knows the average time to cast a rolling flame. She responds from her desk, noting that it takes a new third circle mage about 10 seconds, while a higher circle mage can reduce it to 5. Ludger agrees but specifies that he is interested in the average standard of the students sitting in this very room. Tossing her blue hair back with a smug look, Flora claims the average is 5 seconds at best, though she can easily do it much faster. Amused by her confidence, Ludger invites her to step down and demonstrate her casting speed for the entire class. Accepting the challenge without hesitation, Flora pushes off her desk to make her way down. Standing before the class, Flora draws her wand, sparking a flash of fire on the wooden floor. A swirl of intense orange flame begins to rapidly gather and spin into existence. With a dramatic flourish, Flora raises her wand and instantly conjures a blazing, intricate magic circle. The surrounding students murmur in absolute awe, amazed by her incredible speed and praising the genius of the Lumos family. Ludger checks his pocket watch, noting that she managed to manifest the flame in a mere 4.78 seconds, an incredibly fast time for a second year. While Ludger admits her execution was flawless, Flora turns back to him with a smug expression, acting as if it was effortless. But her pride is instantly shattered when Ludger coldly declares that 4.78 seconds is still far too slow. Ludger points out that even the record for a third circle mage is a mere 4.41 seconds, which is still painfully slow, while Flora tries to save face by claiming she could easily beat that with some practice. But Ludger shuts her down instantly, clarifying that he wasn't calling her slow. He was calling the legendary 4.41 second record itself completely sluggish. The classroom erupts into quiet murmurs as the students question if their professor is actually serious, wondering just how fast he could possibly cast it. Telling them to watch closely, Ludger calmly raises his wand to demonstrate the true way to utilize the rolling flame. With a swift flick of his wrist, a beam of light shoots out of his wand in the blink of an eye. Flora watches in confusion, realizing that the movements he's making don't match the standard casting technique for the spell at all. But before she can even process it, a massive, brilliant magic circle bursts into existence with a blinding flash. The entire lecture hall is left completely dumbfounded, unable to comprehend the sheer speed of the manifestation. Chaos erupts in the stands as the students shout in disbelief, realizing he completed the entire high-level technique in under a single second. Flora stands frozen, her mind racing as she realizes there was absolutely no preparation process before the spell manifested. Unfazed by their shock, Ludger asks if they were paying attention and offers to show them the process one more time. Once again, he points his wand forward, initiating the spell with absolute precision. Instantly, the blazing magic circle erupts once more, illuminating the entire room in a brilliant glow. A heavy silence falls over the classroom as the students stare at the sheer impossibility of what they are witnessing. Seeing their stunned faces, Ludger notes internally that the arrogant look in his students' eyes has finally changed. He clicks his pocket watch, casually revealing that his cast took a mere 0.24 seconds, shattering the previous world record. He acknowledges that his casting method must have looked bizarre, admitting that his initial technique wasn't actually the rolling flame itself. He explains that he used a highly advanced method, a specialized technique designed specifically to prepare another technique. The students whisper among themselves, completely baffled by the concept of a technique meant to assist another technique. Ludger simplifies it, explaining that he merely input his specific magic values to receive an instantaneous output. He compares his method to a blueprint that directly utilizes the biological hardware of the casting mage. In this system, the mage's mana acts as the data being consumed, while the spell technique serves as the running program. This program ultimately manifests the software, which is what people commonly understand as magic. He officially introduces his revolutionary concept, calling this foundational system the source code. Flora is left completely paralyzed with shock, wondering who this mysterious professor actually is and how he could possess a form of magic she has never even heard of. The professor directly asks Flora if he has finally answered her question, and she can only manage to squeeze out a submissive confirmation as she stands frozen in place. He doesn't let her off easy, coldly pointing out that she rudely interrupted his lesson simply because she couldn't handle being confronted with knowledge beyond her understanding. When he demands to know if she agrees with his harsh assessment, Flora clenches her jaw in deep frustration but has no choice but to admit that he is right. Staring her down with an intense, piercing gaze, the professor declares that because she directly challenged his authority, she must now face the consequences of her actions. To the shock of everyone present, the professor sentences Flora Lumos to receive 10 harsh penalty points for her insubordination. The classroom instantly erupts into worried whispers, with her classmate Cheryl looking on in absolute disbelief that someone as prestigious as Flora is actually being penalized. Flora bites her lip in humiliation, her face cast in shadow as she struggles to hold back her mounting rage and embarrassment. Whipping around with a sharp turn, she begins to march back up the steps to her seat under the watchful eye of the instructor. However, just as she begins her retreat, the professor speaks up once more to deliver an unexpected twist. He acknowledges that the rolling flame technique she demonstrated earlier was absolutely perfect, and decides to reward her with 10 positive points to offset her penalty. He calmly explains that he doesn't harbor any hatred towards skilled students, offering her a rare word of praise for her genuine talent. Squeezing her fist so tight it trembles, Flora reluctantly forces out a quiet thank you to her new instructor. Her peers quickly realize that the points canceled each other out, letting out sighs of relief while others merely scoff at the dramatic display. As soon as Flora returns to her desk, Cheryl leans over with deep concern, asking if she is holding up all right after such an intense confrontation. Flashing a seemingly bright grin, Flora assures her friend that she is perfectly fine and thanks her for showing concern. Cheryl is instantly relieved, marveling at how incredibly resilient Flora is to bounce back from such a humiliating ordeal so quickly. But while Cheryl happily looks away, Flora's expression immediately drops back into a cold, calculating silence. She clenches her jaw once more, her mind racing with a burning desire to uncover the truth behind this terrifyingly powerful professor. With the dramatic opening confrontation finally settled, the professor removes his heavy overcoat and prepares to officially begin his lecture. He warns the class that the revolutionary source code will only be taught to a select few students whom he personally handpicks based on their performance, urging them all to keep up. The high stakes cause a wave of tension to ripple through the lecture hall, leaving many of the students swallowing hard in intimidation. Yet, despite the immense pressure, a sense of profound awe begins to settle over the entire auditorium. One student with glasses recalls how everyone had warned him about how bizarre this new professor was, admitting that he originally had serious doubts about taking this class. But seeing the professor's sheer brilliance firsthand, his eyes sparkle with excitement as he realizes just how amazing this opportunity truly is. Before long, the academy clock chimes to signal the end of the period, and the professor formally concludes his historic first lesson. As the professor steps out of the classroom, he leaves his students with a final, stern command to review everything they learned today. The moment he departs, the lecture hall erupts with excitement as the students marvel at having witnessed an actual source code. However, the glasses-wearing student scoffed quietly, unable to comprehend why his peers were so easily impressed. That's when a smug, wealthy-looking student approaches him, mockingly pointing out how obvious it is that he lacks basic knowledge. The arrogant noble goes so far as to insult his status, claiming that this lack of sophistication is exactly why he is nothing but a commoner. Instead of firing back, the glasses student simply stares at him in dead silence, completely unfazed by the insult. He nonchalantly glances away, ignoring the noble's presence entirely as another student with blue hair walks down the steps nearby. Realizing he was being ignored, the noble fumes with rage, while the glasses student innocently scratches his head and asks if the noble was even talking to him. He quickly tries to clarify things, waving his hand in panic to assure the angry noble that he wasn't trying to mock him. Introducing himself as Javon, the eldest son of Baron Pelliot, the noble clenches his fist in fury, demanding to know how a commoner dares to look down on his high status. But the name of Baron Pelliot only draws a questioning response from someone nearby. It is the blue-haired student, who casually steps down the stairs while pointing out that Javon's family only lives on the remote outskirts of the empire. Javon merely scoffs, trying to regain his composure by muttering that Siren Academy must be accepting just about anyone these days. Without missing a beat, the blue-haired student fires back, agreeing that the academy indeed has no problem admitting the foolish sons of minor barons. Javon's face contorts with absolute rage as his pride is thoroughly shattered by the sharp retort. Losing all control, he draws his glowing wand, fiercely threatening to make both of them pay for daring to insult a noble. Even in the face of a drawn weapon, the blue-haired student remains entirely calm, staring back with cold, deadpan eyes. When the blue-haired student dares him to go right ahead, Javon flinches in shock, completely caught off guard by the lack of fear. Taking another step forward, the blue-haired student challenges him again, eager to see the consequences if Javon actually dares to launch an attack inside the classroom. He reminds the trembling noble that Siren Academy won't overlook such violence regardless of status, asking if he failed to read the school's strict rules. Pointing around the room, he advises Javon to keep his voice down, especially since there are still plenty of other students watching them. Javon quickly turns around only to realize that his classmates are indeed whispering and laughing at his embarrassing display. Flustered and utterly humiliated, he turns on his heel to storm off, leaving them with a weak, parting threat to wait and see. With the bully finally gone, the glasses-wearing student lets out a massive sigh of relief, thankful that the confrontation didn't escalate any further. He offers a warm smile to his savior, thanking him for the help before introducing himself as Aiden. Introducing himself as Leo, the blue-haired boy shrugs off the gratitude, explaining that he simply cannot stand nobles who abuse their high status. Instead of taking the warning seriously, Aiden beams with admiration and praises him for being such a nice person, which only serves to irritate Leo. Annoyed by the overly friendly response, Leo decides he has had enough of the conversation and prepares to make his exit. Aiden quickly calls out for him to wait, but Leo points out that he doesn't even know where he is headed. Holding up his textbook, Aiden points out that they are actually heading to the exact same alchemy class next. With a heavy sigh, Leo reluctantly gives in and tells Aiden he can do whatever he wants. As they walk together, Leo advises Aiden to be much less obvious in the future, leaving the glasses-wearing boy completely puzzled. Leo bluntly lists Aiden's obvious tells, from acting like a country bumpkin to showing his lack of proper magic training, forcing Aiden to sheepishly realize his own blunders. He goes on to warn Aiden that he needs to quickly learn how things work around Siren Academy, especially when it comes to the powerful second-year students. Leo begins his warning by introducing Flora Lumos, a prominent second-year student with a notoriously smug attitude. Aiden immediately recognizes her as the bold student who walked right up to the platform during their lecture. Leo warns him that Flora has a terrible personality, adding that she even drove their previous manifestation professor to resign. Next, he warns him about Erender von Exilian, the prestigious third princess who comes from the Empire's direct royal bloodline. Leo stresses that commoners like them should avoid getting involved with nobles, prompting Aiden to recall seeing the princess in their class as well. Confirming her presence, Leo prepares to introduce the final and most dangerous figure on his list. He introduces Fruden Wahlberg, a powerful second year who commands the most dominant clique in the entire academy. Recognizing the Wahlberg name as one of the three great duke families, Aiden is relieved the leader isn't in their class, especially since Leo notes they view commoners as mere insects. However, Leo drops a bombshell by revealing that the blonde bully they just clashed with belongs to that very same faction, making Aiden realize he is already on their bad side. Accepting his grim fate, Aiden calmly asks if there are any other threats, leaving Leo to wonder if the boy has serious guts or is just incredibly slow to catch on. Leo promises to explain the rest on the way, but is caught completely off guard when Aiden cheerfully invites him to grab lunch together later. Leo immediately rejects the friendly offer, completely baffled as to why Aiden would think they are suddenly lunch buddies. Meanwhile, a mysterious silver-haired student with striking blue eyes observes them from a balcony, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. The mysterious student then strolls gracefully past the grand arched windows of the academy corridor, lost in his own thoughts. He quietly contemplates the unfolding situation with a calm, calculating expression. With a subtle smile, he admits to himself that this outcome is far better than he could have ever anticipated, delighted by how things are playing out. He reflects on how this world is fundamentally modeled after the 19th century, meaning that even with all its magic, it still lags far behind the scientific marvels of the 21st century. This technological gap is precisely why he decided to merge modern source code with magic, though he admits he never expected such an overwhelmingly positive response from the people here. He recalls how even his own master, upon first laying eyes on his creation, offered a simple "not bad" without any criticism, which was more than enough validation to keep him moving forward. While his system allows him to cast magic faster and with greater precision, he must remember that the identity he assumed, Ludger, is supposed to be nothing more than a mediocre third circle mage. Knowing he cannot rely solely on his source code forever, he resolves to be far more discreet to avoid raising any unwanted suspicion. Stopping in front of a grand set of double doors, he wonders if this is meant to be his new private office. He reaches out and slowly turns the handle, the door creaking open to reveal the room inside. To his surprise, a striking silver-haired woman is already waiting inside, turning around to greet him as he enters. She warmly welcomes him as Professor Ludger and asks how he likes the interior of his new space, catching him slightly off guard. She explains that Siren Academy provides private quarters for all its instructors, encouraging him to make himself completely at home. After taking a seat across from her, he politely asks what brings her to his office, prompting her to playfully ask if she isn't allowed to be there. He clarifies that he is simply curious about her presence, admitting with a straight face that having her there makes him a bit nervous. Amused by his honesty, she giggles and assures him there is no need to worry, reminding him that as the Academy's president, it is her duty to look after her professors. However, her playful demeanor shifts slightly as she casts a sharp, calculating glance in his direction. Ludger can't help but feel a strange sense of unease creeping over him every single time their eyes meet. She pouts, complaining that his reaction was far too calm and that she had hoped to startle him more, though he insists he was actually quite shocked. Internally, he fumes, thinking that running into a literal ghost in the dead of night wouldn't have been as heart-stopping as finding her waiting right behind the door. She mentions that all the other new professors were utterly startled by her surprise visits, revealing that he is the final stop on her rounds. He finds himself questioning not only her bizarre habit of visiting every new hire, but also why he was specifically left for last. A sudden, chilling thought strikes him as he looks at her knowing smile. Could she possibly know his true identity? He reasons that no matter how hidden a secret society claims to be, the head of an institution like Siren would undoubtedly catch wind of any suspicious elements within her academy. The terrifying question looms in his mind. Does she already suspect him of being a spy? He internally panics at the sheer unfairness of it all, lamenting that while he holds a high rank in a secret society, he doesn't actually align with their goals at all. Breaking his train of thought, she brings up a rumor about him accepting freshmen into his class, which he calmly confirms by explaining he doesn't believe in separating students by grade level. She reassures him that she doesn't object to his methods, admitting she actually agrees with them while noting that this year's freshman class has some truly incredible talent. She mentions that some of these new students even wield irregular magic, to which he replies that he only recently received the student list himself as his hand reaches for the documents. She warns him that the princess is also enrolled this term, advising him to ensure no incidents occur, not to give her special treatment, but to avoid any diplomatic trouble. Hearing about the princess's presence immediately catches Ludger off guard, causing a cold sweat as he realizes the stakes just got much higher. Flashing a bright, encouraging smile, she tells him that she expects great things from him as Professor Ludger. Standing up from her seat, she expresses relief that his first class went so smoothly, noting that the glowing student evaluations have completely eased her worries. In a rare moment of politeness, Ludger offers to pour her a cup of tea, which she happily accepts with a cheerful thank you. However, she politely declines the offer as she opens the door, explaining that she has too much work piled up but appreciates the gesture nonetheless. With a final parting word, she expresses how much she looks forward to working alongside him as the door shuts behind her. Outside the office, she pauses for a silent moment, her hands still resting on the brass door handle as she contemplates their interaction. Waiting in the corridor, her trusted associate Wolford immediately asks for her assessment of the new professor. He directly questions whether they can truly place their trust in this mysterious Professor Ludger. Walking down the spacious hallway, she honestly admits that she still doesn't have a definitive answer. She explains that while she keeps a close watch on anyone she finds suspicious, she hasn't managed to dig up any concrete evidence on him yet. Wolford smiles, admitting he had hoped her personal involvement would speed up the investigation into the man's background. She chuckles softly, acknowledging his point as she brings a finger to her chin in deep thought. She reveals that she has already secretly cast her magic eye of bewitching on him twice, yet he remained completely unaffected. She calculates that as a mere fourth circle mage, he shouldn't have possessed the mental defenses to resist her spell, let alone show absolutely no reaction. This leads her to the terrifying conclusion that he must have resisted her hypnotic gaze through sheer, unyielding willpower alone. A smirk plays on her lips as she thinks to herself what an incredibly fascinating man this new professor is. With a terrorist train attack and a secret society lurking within the academy's walls, she resolves to stay highly vigilant and let nothing slip past her. She begins to wonder if the entire train disaster was actually a massive cover-up designed to hide something far more sinister. Specifically, she suspects it might have been the perfect, chaotic opportunity to swap one identity for another. Glancing back at her companion, she asks Wolford for his own thoughts on this highly suspicious situation. Wolford admits he isn't entirely sure yet either, but he is absolutely certain that this new professor is far from ordinary. The president warmly reassures Wolford that she completely trusts his sharp judgment of character, even if he claims it is just an old man's gut feeling. Still, with Ludger's true motives remaining a mystery, they both agree it is best to keep a close eye on the new professor for the time being. Meanwhile, back in his office, Ludger collapses onto his sofa, letting out a massive groan of pure exhaustion from the stress of the encounter. He realizes that the unexpected private meeting with the academy president was nothing short of a tense, thinly veiled interrogation. Shaking off his anxiety, he reassures himself that he hasn't done anything to get caught, deciding it's time to focus back on his work. As he reviews the student files, he notes that one of the exceptional students belongs to the Lumos family, a highly influential ducal household. He suddenly worries if this powerful student might use her family's immense status to pressure him over their previous confrontation. However, he quickly dismisses the fear, hoping that the extra points he awarded her as a peace offering will keep her satisfied. Flipping through the documents, he acknowledges the president's words about the sheer number of incredible talents enrolled, including a magic tower prodigy and an imperial princess. But as he turns to the next profile, something unexpected catches his eye, causing him to pause in surprise. He finds himself staring at the profile of a young, bespectacled boy rumored to be a user of highly unusual irregular magic. Tapping his leg anxiously, Ludger can't shake the nagging feeling that this particular student looks incredibly familiar to him. Deciding not to overthink it, he flips the page, confident that the memory of where they met will eventually come back to him. Either way, he knows he must remain highly vigilant. As the president's prying questions prove, he has yet to earn her trust. A dangerous alternative crosses his mind as he wonders if it might actually be more beneficial to align himself with the secret society. He recalls how a mysterious girl addressed him as First Order, realizing she must have known the real Ludger's appearance before the tragic train incident. This meant she had simply assumed Ludger used his disguise magic to alter his physical form. If the original Ludger truly was a legendary master of disguise and infiltration, it would explain why she accepted his new face without a second thought. He quickly shakes his head to dismiss the idea, knowing that getting involved with such a ruthless organization offers absolutely no guarantee of survival. With a heavy sigh, he resolves that his best path forward is to simply play the part of a perfect teacher, just as a sudden knock on his door interrupts his thoughts. Opening the door, Ludger is greeted by a nervous staff member who hands him a slip, which turns out to be a patrol ticket. The messenger confirms it is Ludger's turn for guard duty today, reminding him of a clause he vaguely recalls seeing in his employment contract. Before Ludger can even complain, the anxious messenger quickly bids farewell and dashes down the hallway. Left alone with the paper, Ludger can only stare at it in resignation, realizing he has no choice but to go on patrol. As night falls over the Grand Academy, he quietly hopes for a peaceful shift, completely unaware of the strange magical disturbances beginning to crackle in the darkness. Inside the Academy's massive training hall, students gather to practice their spellcasting and hone their combat skills. Having her authority challenged, the noble girl looks on in complete disbelief. Placing her hands on her hips, Lady Dwynma furiously demands that the girl repeat her words. Unfazed, the commoner firmly asserts that the training hall is a public facility open to all students. She turns the argument back on the noble, suggesting that Dwynma leave if she finds her presence unbearable. Dwynma sneers with pure arrogance, offended that a mere commoner would dare talk back to her. The silver-haired girl reminds her that the academy makes no distinctions based on noble bloodlines or status. Flipping her golden hair, Dwynma and her companions mock the commoner, claiming those rules are just lies to spare her feelings. Surrounded by laughing nobles, the girl realizes that attempting to reason with them is entirely hopeless. Clenching her teeth as Dwynma demands a groveling apology, she accepts that words won't change their mind. Choosing to ignore the ridiculous demand, she calmly turns her back to walk away. Dwynma fumes with anger while her lackeys laugh, furious at being dismissed by a commoner. Unable to accept being ignored, Dwynma's hand tightens around her magic wand. Lashing out in rage, she draws a magical emblem in the air to launch an attack from behind. A deadly bolt of magic shoots across the hall, aimed straight at the unsuspecting student. Her own companions wince in shock, alarmed that she would cast an offensive spell inside the hall. Hearing the surge of energy behind her, the silver-haired girl suddenly turns around. She stares in panic as the lethal magic hurtles directly toward her with no time to dodge. Shielding her face, she readies herself for the destructive impact. However, the dangerous attack completely fizzes out into harmless residual sparks. Furious that her spell was nullified, Dwynma spins around to find out who dared to interfere. A stern voice echoes across the training grounds, questioning her out-of-line behavior. Dwynma breaks into a cold sweat as the voice scolds her for turning a training session into a brawl. The commoner girl looks up in surprise as the authority figure dismisses Dwynma's attack as entirely pathetic. Standing atop the stairs, a professor lowers their wand, disappointed by the chaos on the very first day of term. Looking down from the stairs, the professor cold-heartedly declares that Siren Academy seems to be nothing more than a joke to them. The silver-haired girl gasps in surprise upon recognizing Professor Ludger, while anxious whispers immediately spread among the surrounding students. Descending smoothly with magical wind swirling around his boots, he notes that a simple fight might be forgiven, but this was an unprovoked, one-sided attack. Dwynma arrogantly argues she was protecting the natural authority of nobles, but Ludger lands heavily and sharply interrupts her. Looking down with piercing dark eyes, he sternly reminds her that every single student at Siren Academy is treated as an equal. Dwynma flinches in rage as he cold-bloodedly warns her that nobility of blood will not grant her special treatment here. Turning on his heel, Ludger commands her to follow him immediately, leaving Dwynma grunting in frustrated defeat. Deeply humiliated, Dwynma clenches her teeth while her face darkens with pure malice. Unable to contain her fury, she screams after him, calling him nothing more than a disgraceful, fallen noble. Dwynma gasps in sudden terror, instantly realizing the taboo severity of the insult she just blurted out. Her green-haired noble companion falters back in fear, stammering out her name in complete disbelief at her outburst. The silver-haired commoner girl swallows hard, sensing the sudden, bone-chilling drop in atmosphere. Ludger freezes mid-step, his face hardening as a deadly silence grips the entire hall. Glancing back with icy, murderous eyes, he quietly asks her to repeat what she just said. A suffocating aura of overwhelming pressure erupts from his body, forcing Dwynma to wince and shudder in primal terror. Taking a heavy, deliberate step backward, his oppressive aura deepens as he orders her to say it again. Dwynma trembles uncontrollably against the crushing pressure, her pride instantly crumbling into terrified stutters. His boots come down with a heavy stomp right in front of her feet, towering over her like a dark force with his face cast in shadow. He asks if he really is just a fallen noble to her. Just then, a panicked student dashes into the hallway, yelling for Professor Selena to come quickly. Reaching out her gloved hand in sheer panic, Selena gasps and desperately screams for him to wait. Despite her cries, Ludger's dark-gloved hand reaches straight toward the trembling girl. Selena screams Professor Ludger's name, desperately praying he doesn't do something extreme. However, his gloved hand merely taps Dwynma gently on the shoulder, causing her to shut her eyes tight in terror. To everyone's utter shock, Ludger calmly agrees with her statement and walks off with her, leaving Professor Selena totally speechless. Dwynma is left utterly stunned, sweating in confusion as Ludger's hand remains firmly on her shoulder. Ludger looks down at her with cold authority, reminding her that regardless of his fallen noble background, he is still an official professor at Siren. He sternly points out that disrespecting him directly challenges a teacher's authority, making Dwynma clench her jaw in fear. Before taking extreme measures, Ludger pauses his reprimand. Towering over her, he unexpectedly acknowledges that as a young student, adapting to this prestige academy isn't easy. He decides to let her disrespect toward him slip with a simple warning, but insists she will still face discipline for harassing her classmate. Turning his attention toward Lin, he asks if she was harmed, expressing genuine relief when the young girl nervously reassures him she is okay. He then hands the rest of the situation over to Professor Selena, who flusteredly accepts the task. With his eyes heavily shadowed, Ludger strides away in silence, leaving the entire courtyard frozen in shock. Holding her uniform in disbelief, Lin realizes with a fluttering heart that the cold professor actually remembered her name. She thinks back to his massive classroom, wondering how he could recall a single commoner among 80 aristocratic students. She recalls his stern expression when he declared his fundamental belief about the academy. Clutching her chest, Lin softly repeats his words, deeply moved by his belief that every student at Siren is truly equal. A gentle smile spreads across her face as her initial terrifying impression of him completely dissolves. She realizes that beneath his intimidating exterior, he is a mentor she can truly place her trust in. In an adorable chibi moment, she slaps her cheeks with full determination, vowing to give her absolute best in his class. As night settles over the academy, quiet darkness envelopes the lush trees under a starlit sky. On a lonely bench beneath a lamppost, Ludger sits slumped over, groaning softly in extreme discomfort. He clutches his throbbing head, wincing from an excruciating migraine tearing through his mind. With his gloved hands trembling violently, he reaches deep into his coat to pull out a small medicine bottle. Struggling against the blinding pain, he rapidly downs the remedy. As the medication takes effect, Ludger exhales in immense relief, grateful he brought his pills along. He grips his forehead in frustration, exasperated that his chronic condition decided to strike right in front of everyone. Thinking back to the training hall, He remembers feeling the first warning signs of his episode right as he stepped inside. In a comical memory, he recalls trying to rush away before Dwynma's loud outburst forced him to intervene despite his agonizing headache. He tries to convince himself he was polite to Dwynma, though deep down he worries his pain-racked expression made him look terrifyingly strange. Looking down at his empty potion bottle, he realizes he just took his last dose, which will only keep his severe headaches at bay for 5 days at most. Sitting alone on a park bench, he worries that any unexpected magical strain could trigger his condition sooner. Yet borrowing an official lab to brew more medicine would leave an unwanted paper trail. Knowing his situation is growing dangerously precarious, his gaze sharpens with urgency. He resolves that he must establish contact with his external network as quickly as possible. The next day arrives with clear blue skies framing the lush green grounds of the academy. Later on, a sudden question about a werewolf breaks the peaceful morning atmosphere. Sitting at the dining table, Ludger looks at his fellow professors with a calm, skeptical expression as he asks if that is truly what they are discussing. The cheerful Professor Selena brightly confirms the rumor, insisting that a werewolf is indeed the hot topic around campus. She recounts how students traveling late at night reported spotting a menacing, dark figure prowling across the moonlit rooftops in the thick fog. Ludger dryly dismisses the story as nothing more than a typical urban legend, prompting Selena to respond. However, when Selena mentions that there have also been sightings right here within Siren Academy, Ludger's interest is piqued. With a solemn expression, Selena explains that bizarre magical incidents are common here, asking if he has ever heard of Siren's infamous 7 ghost stories. Ludger plainly admits he has never heard of them, leaving Selena astonished by his complete lack of interest in school folklore. When Ludger dryly notes that she sure knows a lot about ghost stories, Selena visibly flinches behind her cheerful smile. Flustered, Selena frantically waves her hands to insist she only researches these myths to connect with students, completely unaware that Ludger was genuinely trying to compliment her. Ludger has to tell her to calm down as she desperately tries to salvage her professional image. Stepping in to save her colleague, Professor Annette shifts the topic, mentioning the impressive rumors surrounding Ludger's very first lecture. Both women lean in with eager curiosity, excitedly bringing up his revolutionary magic manifestation technique known as source code. Suddenly, the entire dining hall falls dead silent as the surrounding professors quietly eavesdrop on their conversation. While Selena pats her flushed cheeks in embarrassment, Annette directly asks Ludger to confirm if the rumors about his magic are true, to which he calmly nods. Learning that the miraculous technique is real, both female professors express absolute amazement at such an impossible feat. All across the dining hall, neighboring faculty members turn around and covertly glance in their direction, completely captivated by the news. Feeling dozens of eyes suddenly locked onto him, Ludger glares back with a hint of suspicion. Annette points out that news of his incredible spellcasting speed has already spread throughout the academy, making him the center of everyone's intense curiosity. Taking a calm bite of his meal, Ludger quietly listens to the chatter surrounding his exceptional spellcasting speed. When the fellow professors suggest he patent his groundbreaking magic at the magic tower, Ludger casually dismisses the idea. In reality, he knows that applying for a patent without powerful backing is just an invitation to get robbed. Setting his fork down, he decides to keep his magic quiet unless someone powerful from the magic tower reaches out first. To make matters worse, envious colleagues like Chris Benamore are already shooting murderous glares at his back. Shifting his focus to private business, Ludger turns his mind toward an intriguing rumor regarding a werewolf. Later that night, a calm silence falls over the town under the bright glow of a full moon. Waiting alone in a secluded dark alleyway, Ludger mutters to himself that his contact is running late. Deciding not to waste any more time waiting in the dark, he takes a step forward to check his surroundings. Suddenly, a massive furry beast creeps out from the shadows, stepping quietly onto the cobblestone path. Without warning, the dangerous creature lunges aggressively, aiming its razor-sharp claws directly at Ludger. With effortless grace, Ludger swivels his body to the side, letting the beast's attack slice harmlessly through thin air. In a flash, Ludger plants his foot firmly onto the ground to execute a swift counterattack. He slams the beast hard into the paved floor, causing it to crash with a loud groan of pain. Looking down at the fallen attacker, Ludger coolly asks if keeping him waiting was all just for a stupid joke. Lying flat on his back, the monster snickers in defeat, complaining that Ludger never acts surprised for once. Setting his playfulness aside, the creature gathers his strength to get back up. Pushing himself off the ground, the beastly figure rises and familiarly greets Ludger as his brother. A faint smile appears on Ludger's face under the moonlight as he warmly welcomes back his loyal subordinate, Hans. Ludger remarks that Hans is still causing trouble wherever he goes, demanding to know why he looks like a giant beast. Gritting his sharp teeth in frustration, Hans groans that he certainly didn't choose to get turned into this monstrosity. Hans explains that he was unexpectedly attacked and bitten by a small pet dog carried by a lady earlier. As Ludger chuckles behind his hand at the absurd situation, Hans angrily fumes that his weird bad luck must be a curse. The truth of the matter is that Hans possesses a truly unique and bizarre bodily condition. Whenever any animal bites him, Hans involuntarily transforms into a muscular, half-human version of that creature, whether it is a cat or a fluffy Pomeranian. Asking if his companion brought the cure, Hans is handed a glowing green syringe while still stuck in his muscular wolf form. Without hesitation, Hans stabs the needle into his arm, relieved that he won't have to wander around looking like a beast. As the green antidote surges through his veins, Hans's body trembles as his furry traits begin to dissolve back into human flesh. Still shaking off the lingering effects, Hans admits he would have suffered indefinitely without Ludger, noting how this situation mirrors their very first encounter. He recalls their bizarre first meeting when he was transformed into a giant werewolf chihuahua, chuckling over how close Ludger came to killing him before they talked it out. A brief message reminds them of Ludger's newly adopted identity as Ludger Cherish. Rubbing his neck in relief, Hans realizes that this was the exact name Ludger had written in his recent letter. Now fully human again, a shirtless Hans cracks his neck in disbelief, asking how Ludger managed to pose as a professor at Siren Academy. He demands to know what kind of insane circumstances forced Ludger into taking on such a fake persona. Late into the night, uncontrollable laughter echoes through the quiet alleyways between the city buildings. Hans bursts into hysterics over Ludger's quick-witted lie, while Ludger dryly replies that he simply did what was necessary to survive. Hans continues cracking up at the absurdity of Ludger accidentally posing as a secret society executive known as First Order, prompting Ludger to tell him to shut up. Adjusting his coat, Ludger turns serious and asks Hans if he has any information regarding the First Order title. Hans puts a finger to his chin, recalling underground rumors about mysterious new players operating in the shadows under grand titles. Ludger listens attentively, pressing Hans to reveal the actual name of this hidden group. The ominous title appears in the darkness, Black Dawn. An ancient occult emblem flashes as Hans confirms that Black Dawn is indeed the name of the secret organization. Recognizing the danger of his situation, Ludger stresses the need to prepare for any slip-ups before asking if Hans brought his briefcase. Hans hands over the dark leather case, assuring Ludger that he didn't tamper with it and couldn't open it even if he tried. Ludger feels a pang of guilt over keeping Sheridan waiting, but Hans tells him not to feel bad given the unexpected chaos. Opening the case, Ludger shakes out 2 pills into his gloved hand, remarking on how both of them rely on specialized drugs to survive. Popping the pills into his mouth, Ludger chews his medication and asks why Hans told him to wait in his letter if he had arrived 2 days earlier. Hans stares back in total confusion, asking Ludger what in the world he is talking about. Ludger swallows his pill and mentions hearing rumors of a werewolf in the capital 2 days ago, but Hans swears he only arrived today. A heavy silence settles over both of them as a chilling realization dawns. If the werewolf wasn't Hans, then another monster is lurking nearby. Right on cue, A blood-curdling howl echoes through the night air, instantly catching both men off guard. Hans flinches in sheer panic, stuttering as he asks if that chilling sound could really be what he fears. Ludger confirms his worst fear with a calm, heavy answer, leaving no room for doubt. High above the moonlit rooftops, the horrifying truth reveals itself. Perched high atop a stone chimney sits the unmistakable silhouette of a massive werewolf. As the beast snarls menacingly with drool dripping from its sharp fangs, Ludger realizes the rumors were entirely true. Hans frantically whispers to make a run for it, but Ludger stops him, warning that any sudden movement will draw the beast's predatory gaze. However, as Ludger observes the beast perched above them, something unexpected catches his attention. A metallic tag glimmers brightly against the thick black fur around the monster's neck. Opening his leather case, Ludger casually tells Hans he needs to inspect something, driving Hans into panic at the thought of fighting it. Ludger points out that the collar means someone released the creature on purpose, making Hans wonder who could do such a thing. Unsheathing his custom revolver and spinning the loaded chamber, Ludger replies that uncovering the truth is exactly what they are about to do. As Hans notes that it has been a long time since Ludger used that gun, Ludger casually mentions his former days as a cryptid hunter. Hans suddenly remembers that period and asks what alias Ludger used back when he hunted beasts. The legendary name rolls off their tongues. Van Helsing. Striding forward with his dark coat fluttering in the night breeze, Ludger steps up under his iconic mantle of Abraham Van Helsing. Up on the chimney, the werewolf detects a sound below and turns its ferocious gaze toward the alleyway. Ludger purposefully rolls a metal barrel across the stone path to draw the beast's attention, stepping right into the open. Enraged by the challenge, the beast snarls viciously, razor-sharp teeth dripping with fresh saliva. With explosive speed, the creature vaults off the high chimney and plunges down into the alley. It hits the pavement with a heavy thud, landing mere feet away from Ludger. Glowing blue eyes burning with wild rage, the massive beast growls deeply as heat and drool steam from its jaw. Looking down calmly, Ludger notices the heavy restraints on its neck and realizes there is a lot he wants to ask this creature. As the monster rears back and unleashes a deafening roar, Ludger decides he will get his answers once he captures and interrogates it. Without giving him a second to think, the ferocious beast leaps forward, slashing its deadly claws right toward Ludger. Ludger steps down with precision, activating a glowing blue magic circle beneath his boot with a sharp metallic ring. As the beast slashes viciously, Ludger dodges effortlessly, shifting within his spell circles like a ghost. The werewolf continues its frantic assault, but Ludger smoothly sways around every strike without breaking a sweat. Landing gracefully back on his feet, Ludger stands completely unscathed before his enraged opponent. Refusing to yield, the monster lunges straight at him, thrusting its deadly claws forward with ferocious force. With incredible composure, Ludger lightly steps aside, letting the beast's lethal attack pass right by him. A confident smirk forms on Ludger's face as he prepares to execute his true countermeasure. A series of intense blue acoustic spell circles instantly expand across the ground beneath them. The monster lets out an agonizing shriek, clutching its head as high-frequency waves pierce its sensitive ears. Overwhelmed by the painful frequency, the massive beast collapses heavily onto the stone floor. Writhing in torture, the creature lies incapacitated, its own heightened senses turned against it. Watching from behind a wall, the hidden observer panics in utter confusion, wondering if the beast just ate something bad. As the wolf flails helplessly, Ludger calmly explains that he released ultrasonic waves that give it a splitting headache. Raising a syringe, Ludger remarks that there is no need to waste expensive silver bullets on such a target. Inspecting the needle, he prepares to inject the serum and extract the truth about who created this beast. Before he can act, a sharp whistle suddenly echoes through the alley, catching Ludger's attention. Hearing police officers shouting nearby, Ludger clicks his tongue in frustration at their awful timing. Taking advantage of the distraction, The beast abruptly gathers its strength and leaps high into the dark sky. The creature lands onto a high rooftop to escape, leaving Ludger to react instantly. Without hesitation, Ludger aims upward and shoots out a mechanical grappling wire. The heavy metal hook latches securely onto the stone ledge of the roof above. The high-tension chain pulls taut instantly with a sharp metallic clink. Ludger launches himself into the air, soaring up the side of the building in rapid pursuit. Framed by the bright full moon, Ludger locks his gaze on his target, determined not to let it escape. Down below, the police officers spot movement above and dash into the alley, ordering everyone to arrest anyone suspicious on the rooftop. Ludger sprinted relentlessly across the roof, pursuing the beast at full speed. The werewolf sprinted across the elevated track with supernatural quickness, but Ludger stayed right on its heels. With a powerful leap, the black beast bounded forward, attempting to widen the gap. It slammed down heavily onto the roof of a stationary train car, creating a loud thud upon impact. Ludger landed gracefully right behind it on the train car roof, cutting off its escape. Rising slowly to his feet, Ludger remarked that he had initially only planned to torture the creature a bit. He stood composed amidst the night wind, confronting the towering beast in the middle of the quiet station. Preparing to escalate his attack, Ludger drew a deadly metallic star, admitting the beast had left him with no choice. The werewolf let out a ferocious growl and charged straight back toward Ludger. Without hesitation, Ludger unleashed a blinding stream of spinning thrown blades directly at the approaching monster. Using its monstrous instincts, the werewolf swerved sharply to dodge the flying metal edge. Heavy footfalls echoed as the beast stomped aggressively forward, charging through the volley. However, the thrown blades suddenly curved in midair, spinning backward toward the monster's blind spot. The razor-sharp weapon sliced cleanly into the beast's back, drawing blood with a swift impact. Catching the returning blade cleanly in his gloved hand, Ludger acknowledged the creature's sharp senses. He gripped his cane tightly, admitting he had intended to finish the fight with that single trick. Gathering a surge of bright blue lightning magic around his weapon, Ludger prepared a far more destructive spell. A sudden electrical surge blasted straight into the werewolf, stunning it with blinding sparks. Taking advantage of the opening, Ludger swiftly pulled the hidden blade from inside his walking stick. He slashed downward with a brilliant arc of mana-infused steel. The strike smacked heavily against the werewolf's head, leaving the bewildered creature caught completely off guard. Ludger instantly dropped into a low dash, lunging under the beast's guard with lethal speed. Sensing intense danger, the wounded werewolf frantically leapt backward to regain its distance. Another sharp discharge of magical force detonated right in front of the beast as it tried to retreat. With a menacing growl, the cornered werewolf crouched low, staring down Ludger as he closed in for the final strike. Closing the gap in a flash, Ludger landed a brutal strike directly onto the werewolf's snout. With a sharp metallic clink, he unlatched the hidden blade concealed inside his cane. Ducking low under the beast's reach, he swept past with unbelievable speed. The monster's slit eye widened in horror as Ludger locked his gaze onto its exposed neck. A single, brilliant line of light severed the night air as the werewolf's head flew cleanly off its body. Meanwhile, down in the quiet alleyways below, hurried panting echoed through the darkness. Clutching a heavy briefcase, Hans caught his breath while wondering when Ludger would finish hunting the beast. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed right in front of him, instantly cutting his thoughts short. Hans shrieked in terror as the bloody, severed head of the giant werewolf hit the cobblestones at his feet. Dropping down behind him, Ludger calmly asked if he was scared, prompting an irritated outburst from Hans about almost dropping the bag. Swallowing hard, Hans asked if he was seriously going to leave the creature's remains behind, to which Ludger nonchalantly confirmed he had already gotten what he needed. Baffled by his response, Hans questioned why he bothered dragging a giant wolf head all the way across town in the first place. Ludger confessed with a straight face that he simply wanted to scare him, leaving Hans exasperated over his childish revenge. Glancing down at the grotesque head, Ludger revealed that the creature wasn't a natural cryptid, but rather an artificial lab creation. Knowing someone was actively conducting dangerous experiments, Ludger declared they needed to accelerate their plans, catching Hans off guard. Ludger explained that settling down in this city was far safer than returning to the capital, making it necessary to stay put for now. Although Hans voiced concern over the city's rampant gangs and hidden syndicates, Ludger countered that the surrounding chaos would serve as perfect cover while ordering him to gather intel. Realizing the entire workload was being dumped on him, Hans shouted in disbelief. Ludger reminded him that because he was currently under heavy suspicion, he couldn't afford to make any visible moves himself. He promised to step into action only after Hans successfully secured the necessary information. Reassured by his role, Hans gave an agreeing nod, boasting that gathering intelligence was his true specialty. Even so, Ludger knew better than to assume their grand scheme would unfold without a hitch. Bound to act with extreme caution, he resolved to quietly cultivate his own strength in the shadows. The presence of a lab mark on the werewolf proved that a formidable organization was engineering monsters right out in the open. Yet as he gazed up at the moonlit city, Ludger put the matter aside, preferring to avoid unnecessary trouble for as long as possible. Headlines blare the alarming news that the unidentified murderer from Reborn is somehow still alive. Reports detail that 5 more victims were slaughtered in Reborn over the weekend, pushing the total body count past 10. Newspapers publish grim crime scene photos along with witness accounts describing a terrifying beast with black fur. Ludger reads through the paper, noticing the police's empty promises to catch the killer while panic spreads among the public. Shocked by the news, Ludger realizes he killed a werewolf on Saturday, making Sunday's new casualties impossible unless something else is at play. A disturbing truth dawns on him. There might be more than one werewolf stalking the area. Before he can piece the mystery together, a magical orb on his desk suddenly begins to chime loudly. Shortly after, an emergency assembly is called at the academy, filling the faculty hall with anxious whispers. Noticing Ludger enter the hall, Professor Selina cheerfully calls out to offer him a seat beside her. As he walks past the seated faculty, professors murmur about his newly created magic and his fallen noble status. Taking a seat next to him, Selina quietly discloses that 2 first-year students were brutally attacked the previous night. She explains that while both students will survive, their horrific slash wounds clearly resemble severe animal claw marks. Selina adds that rumor links their injuries directly to the monster sightings in Reborn, leaving Ludger lost in thought. Professor Marie Ross steps to the front of the room, instructing the chatter to quiet down for the president's arrival. Selina softly informs Ludger that Marie Ross is a veteran pharmacology professor who has taught at Siren for over 20 years. The entire hall falls silent as the academy president glides toward the front of the grand chamber. Taking the floor, President Elisa officially announces that an unidentified monster has infiltrated Siren's grounds. She confirms the attack on the 2 first years, revealing that eyewitnesses identified the culprit as a werewolf or cryptid. Rejecting the claim, Professor Hugo Bert Ego leans forward and openly questions the accuracy of the report. President Elisa fixes him with a sharp glare, asking Hugo if he has an actual objection to present. Hugo smugly highlights that Siren sits on land directly safeguarded by the powerful Exilian Empire. He smirks patronizingly, insisting that an elite institution shouldn't be panicked by childish ghost stories. Fixing her hair, the president coldly reminds Hugo that 2 students are currently fighting for their lives. Hugo smugly counters that because both victims were nobles, the assault was likely a deliberate hit rather than a wild beast's rampage. Her eyes narrow at his words, suspecting that Hugo's dismissal hides a far more sinister political agenda. Hugo boldly claims that the culprit behind the attacks is likely one of the commoner students studying at Siren. The shocking accusation leaves the female professor stunned, unable to believe he would make such a targeted claim. Hugo passionately argues to the room, pointing out that only noble students were targeted and questioning the idea that a wild werewolf invaded. He mocks the monster attack theory, asserting that a commoner simply impersonated a werewolf, earning amused smirks from the aristocrats. As murmurs fill the room, Ludger sits silently with his arms crossed, rhythmically tapping his fingers in deep thought. He reflects on how he initially feared the secret organization, the Black Dawn, would put him at a disadvantage, but realizes circumstances have shifted. Instead of uniting during a crisis, the Academy faculty continues to tear itself apart through petty class politics. The silver-haired professor looks on in disappointment, questioning whether the continent's top academy is truly this corrupt. Suddenly, Ludger feels a subtle movement on his shoulder as a small spider-like object lands on his coat. Recognizing the paper creature as a disguised message bug, he reaches over with his gloved fingers to retrieve it. His eyes narrow into a cold, sharp gaze as he prepares to inspect the covert drop. Casting a quick glance around the hall to ensure no one notices, he discreetly opens the origami spider. The paper mechanism rustles softly in his hand, unfolding to display coded handwriting on its surface. The secret note reveals that 3 experimental test subjects have escaped, ordering their immediate capture or elimination. Worse still, the message warns that if Siren captures the test subjects first, Ludger's secret identity could be exposed. Staring blankly down at his palm, Ludger realizes the immense danger now threatening his undercover position. He tightly crushes the paper note in his fist, keeping a completely calm facade on the outside. Internally, however, he despairs at the ridiculous streak of terrible luck and endless headaches coming his way. Noticing his sudden posture change, a colleague asks if he feels all right, but Ludger quickly brushes it off. He never anticipated that a simple monster incident at the academy would be directly linked to the Black Dawn. Analyzing their sloppy actions, he deduces that the Black Dawn was also caught unprepared by this unexpected escape. However, the threat remains critical, as his secret identity as a Black Dawn operative is on the verge of being exposed. Clenching his fist, he knows he cannot just stand by, and must hunt down the escaped test subjects before Siren finds them. Because if the Academy catches them first and uncovers the truth, his entire undercover operation is over. Meanwhile, the meeting resumes as the speaker instructs Hugo to focus on his duties and confirm his plan to strengthen patrols. Speaking as the president of Siren, she gives direct orders to strictly warn students against wandering around late at night, telling him to hand out penalty points if necessary. Hugo grudgingly accepts her commands, prompting the meeting to wrap up as everyone is told to return to their duties. After leaving the hall, our protagonist strolls down the paved walkway outside the academy buildings. However, he suddenly halts his footsteps after sensing someone's presence nearby. Without turning around, he nonchalantly calls out to the person tailing him, telling them there is no reason to keep hiding behind the tree. The hidden figure gulps nervously, realizing they have been completely spotted. He turns to face his pursuer directly, standing tall under the clear blue sky. Caught red-handed, the young student cautiously steps out into the open from behind the tree. Looking at her face, he recognizes her as the very same person who had approached him previously. He inwardly notes his surprise, having not expected her to infiltrate the academy disguised as a student. When he bluntly asks what she wants, she stammers uncontrollably, struggling to find the right words. Seeing her struggle to talk out in the open, he tells her to follow him somewhere more private, to which she timidly agrees. Out of nowhere, he turns and casually asks her if she enjoys drinking coffee. Taken completely off guard by such an unexpected question, she can only react in utter confusion. Shortly after, they arrive at a quiet, upscale cafe nearby. The two take a seat across from each other inside, a pair of warm coffee cups resting on the table between them. He kicks off the interrogation by asking for her name, and she nervously stammers out that her name is Sedina Rothian. Hearing a noble surname, he remarks that she must not have enrolled as a commoner, pressing her to reveal her actual identity. Fidgeting her feet anxiously under his intense glare, she insists that Sedina Rothian really is her true name. He is taken aback for a moment, realizing that she isn't using a fake identity after all. Accepting her answer, he asks why she followed him, but she hesitates and glances around, fearful that nearby patrons might overhear them. He reveals a glowing magic barrier around their table that blocks sound, prompting her to address him respectfully as First Order. As he picks up his cup, he firmly instructs her never to address him as First Order, which leaves her flabbergasted at the thought of being so informal. He reminds her that using such a title could expose them to others and commands her to drop it, forcing her to submit and agree. With ground rules set, he rests his cheek on his hand and orders her to get straight to the point and report on the situation. Sedina gets straight to business, reporting that the recent werewolf incident occurred at one of their affiliated facilities, where black mages and the Shamsa school were conducting secret cryptid experiments. She clarifies that the Shamsa school consists of rogue scientists expelled for unethical research, adding that while her access is limited, she knows several test subjects escaped through the sewers directly into Siren. Ludger quietly listens to her report without interrupting, keeping his piercing gaze fixed on her. Sensing his intense stare, Sedina panics and apologizes for speaking out of line, but Ludger calmly reassures her to proceed with her briefing. Relieved, she nods and continues, admitting she sought him out specifically because she heard Professor Ludger himself was somehow tied to the operation. She reveals that a First Order member named Victor Dreadful had formally requested to borrow Ludger's name for the mission. Ludger nonchalantly claims he merely lent his name without knowing the details, though internally he marks down Victor Dreadful for future reckoning. When Sedina mentions that they must urgently hunt down all 3 escaped subjects, Ludger reaches into his coat and interrupts to state that only 2 remain. Sedina recoils in shock as Ludger pulls out a glowing piece of evidence right before her eyes. He casually reveals that he had already personally captured and eliminated one of the escaped test subjects 2 days ago in Reederbelk. Awestruck by his efficiency, Sedina stammers out praise, while Ludger silently ponders why someone as resourceful as her is stuck as a mere Third Order. Looking at her quiet demeanor, Ludger begins to suspect that she might be an outcast within their organization. He realizes her noble lineage is likely the cause, as a radical antisocial group like Black Dawn would naturally distrust anyone of highborn birth. He recognizes the dark reality of her position, that the Order views her as a disposable tool to be exploited and thrown away. Recalling the internal divisions he previously observed in Siren, Ludger is intrigued to find similar fractures forming within Black Dawn itself. Seeing an opportunity in her isolation, Ludger considers leveraging Sedina to gain valuable intelligence and influence. Bringing the focus back to their objective, Ludger notes they must expand their search into the sewer network, asking if Siren is still unaware. Sedina confirms the Academy is still in the dark for now, and Ludger simply nods as he prepares to conclude their meeting. Thanking Sedina Rothian for the vital information, Ludger bids her farewell, leaving her flustered as he prepares to take his leave. Just as he turns to go, Ludger pauses and glances back over his shoulder to offer one last remark. He praises her improvement in communication since their first encounter, encouraging her to keep maintaining that confidence in the future. As Ludger walks out of the cafe, Sedina remains seated at the table, quietly absorbing his encouraging words. Her lips clench slightly as emotion wells up inside her, deeply moved by the rare acknowledgement from her superior. Sitting alone in the quiet space, she bows her head deeply and softly whispers a sincere thank you into the empty air. Through the cafe window, the busy world moves on outside, leaving Sedina sitting alone with a newfound sense of resolve. Outside the establishment, a hand rests against a pillar as someone wonders what just took place moments ago. Looking through the window, she questions if what she witnessed inside was actually magic. Leaning against the column, the blue-haired student wonders what kind of conversation required secret magic and what is really going on between them. Meanwhile, inside the Academy lecture hall, the professor conducts today's class before the entire audience of students. Sitting near the back, she rests her chin on her hand, completely consumed by her own thoughts instead of the lecture. Her mind continues to dwell on the mysterious spell she spotted through the coffee shop window. She remembers how the subtle color of the manna indicated a soundproof barrier, something no ordinary person could ever detect. Questions continue to haunt her as she desperately tries to figure out why they needed such absolute privacy. With a loud snap of her textbook, the instructor wraps up the lecture, warning everyone to stay safe and avoid breaking the evening curfew. As class ends, excited whispers spread among the students regarding the terrifying werewolf rumors. While some worry about getting penalized for breaking rules, others get lured by the huge reward offered for capturing the beast. When asked for his take on the situation, Aiden calmly advises that getting penalty points isn't worth chasing a monster. Sighing at his cautious reply, his friend turns to ask Leo for his opinion on the matter. Leo agrees completely, stating that with actual victims involved, it is far safer to leave the hunt to the academy professors. Out of nowhere, a fiery red-haired girl slams her hands onto the desk, startling Aiden. Aiden attempts to defuse the tension with a polite smile and a warm greeting, while his classmate rolls his eyes. Unfazed by his politeness, Tessie loudly proclaims that her morning is anything but good. Sparks fly as his friend teases her about their previous magic duel, making her furiously insist it ended in a tie while warning him to leave Aiden alone. Pointing aggressively at Aiden, Tessie demands an immediate rematch where neither of them holds back. When she angrily demands an explanation, Aiden flinches and points out that daytime classes and night curfews make a battle impossible. Tessie smirks mockingly, asking if he's just using school rules as a pathetic excuse because he's frightened. Rather than taking the bait, Aiden maintains a totally deadpan, unbothered expression. He cheerfully admits to being a coward, leaving Tessie fuming in rage while his friend snickers next to him. Refusing to drop the subject, Tessie insists on finding another way to compete, taking Aiden off guard. With a sharp glare, she declares that the first person to hunt down and catch the werewolf wins. Before Aiden can object, Leo unexpectedly agrees to the bet, causing Aiden to flinch in complete disbelief at his friend's foolishness. Tessie aggressively points her finger at them, warning them not to run away or complain when she inevitably wins. As Tessie storms out of the classroom, Aiden turns to Leo with a sweat drop, asking why he would accept such a ridiculous challenge. Leo casually shrugs it off, explaining he was only humoring her since the faculty will handle the werewolf anyway, though Aiden remains worried about Tessie's intensity. Leo assures him that Tessie isn't stupid enough to actually hunt the monster herself, but Aiden insists that she is reckless enough to try. Realizing the danger, both boys suddenly push off their desk and stand up in sheer panic. They rush straight to the window, peering outside to see where Tessie went. Watching her from above, they initially hope she is heading to the dorms, only to gasp as she spins around and dashes off. With a stern, unwavering glare, Tessie marches forward, fully committed to capturing the werewolf. Back in the classroom, Aiden and Leo freeze in terror as dramatic shockwaves hit them, realizing they are in deep trouble. Meanwhile, night falls over the academy as cold winds rustle through the surrounding forest canopy. Professor Ludger walks down the dimly lit cobblestone path, commencing his nightly patrol. As he strolls, Ludger notes to himself that an unusual number of people have approached him throughout the day. He thinks back to a frustrating conversation he had earlier. In his memory, a desperate noble bribed him to side with the aristocratic students in exchange for restoring his family's status. Ludger recognized the noble's anxiety, but knew better than to play into the aristocracy's hands. Looking down at the persistent aristocrat in the courtyard, Ludger prepared to shut him down. He coldly reminded the man that equality reigns within Siren's walls, refusing to compromise his position. With that, Ludger turned on his heel to leave, ignoring the noble's frantic pleas to wait. The noble shouted after him in outrage, but his voice faded harmlessly into the background. Returning to the present, Ludger reflects that aligning with the nobles would risk exposing his fake identity and angering the academy president. His sharp eyes suddenly catch a faint movement lurking in the shadows ahead. With a swift flick of magic, he yanks 3 hidden students straight out of the bushes. As the trembling students try to make up an excuse, Ludger mercilessly docks 5 penalty points from each of them. Watching the miserable trio trudge away, Ludger realizes that despite the threat of penalties, around 20 students are sneaking out to hunt the werewolf. Realizing the situation could rapidly spiral out of control, Ludger prepares to intervene before any students get themselves killed. He knows that if he wants to prevent a tragedy, he has to eliminate the werewolf threat personally. His investigation leads him straight to the sewage treatment plant located just outside the academy grounds. Dropping into the subterranean tunnels, he lands silently on the stone pathway alongside the murky water. Remembering Sedina's intel that the beasts entered through the sewer system, Ludger confirms this massive main pipe is the only entry point large enough for them. He ignites a bright light at the end of his cane, noting that no students seem to have ventured into this section yet. Casting the bright glow across the stone vault, he scans his surroundings for any signs of movement. Looking down, he spots distinct werewolf paw prints pressed into the damp ground, realizing there are actually 2 different beasts. Kneeling to examine the tracks, Ludger notes a smaller set of prints following alongside a larger set, praying the trail doesn't cut off unexpectedly. Tracking the footprints through an iron grate, he emerges out into the open path beyond the sewers. But once outside, he reaches a spot where the tracks suddenly scatter in different directions. Stepping firmly alongside the massive set of tracks, he carefully analyzes which path poses the greatest danger. Seeing that the larger werewolf's prints lead directly towards the academy buildings, he realizes the beast is actively hunting for prey. Knowing this larger monster is an immediate threat, Ludger senses that a student could be ambushed at any second. Right on cue, a blood-curdling scream pierces the quiet night air, making Ludger flinch as his worst fears are confirmed. With a student in mortal danger, there isn't a single second to waste. Abandoning the ground tracks, Ludger sprints at full speed straight toward the sound of the scream before it's too late. Nearby, a massive werewolf leaps through the darkness, claws outstretched towards 2 helpless female students cowering together. The terrified girls brace for the worst as the monster closes in, helpless to defend themselves. Just in the nick of time, Ludger swings his cane, channeling a powerful blast of explosive light. The blinding flash of magic erupts directly in front of the lunging beast, cutting off its attack. Overwhelmed by the sudden flash and scorching heat, the beast snarls in pain and disorientation. A bright burst explodes between the monster and the girls, forcing the werewolf to shield its eyes as the blinding flash repels it back. Sent tumbling through the air, the creature hits the ground hard, rolling repeatedly while howling in pain as magic embers singe its fur. As the full moon shines above, Ludger steps gracefully between the trembling students and the monster, standing tall as their savior. Relief washes over the 2 girls as they look up in awe, realizing their savior is none other than Professor Ludger himself. With cold authority, Ludger calls out both Lin and Arender by their full names under the starry night sky. Trembling under his intense gaze, they quickly stand at attention and nervously answer him. Instead of comforting them, Ludger coldly declares that both of them will be receiving 5 penalty points for being out past curfew. The sudden punishment hits the girls like a bolt of lightning, leaving them completely dumbfounded and wide-eyed with shock. Arender can't help but cry out in sheer disbelief at the sudden penalty. She desperately calls out to him to wait as he begins to turn away without another word. Arender angrily asks if he's really leaving without even checking if they are hurt, prompting Ludger to remind her not to raise her voice at a professor while explaining his only duty is returning curfew breakers. Gritting her teeth, Arender mutters under her breath that Lin is all talk and can't even look after herself, prompting a small huff of frustration. Arender then surprisingly pleads with the professor to at least spare Lin from the penalty points, catching Ludger off guard. Lin quickly chimes in to explain that she only ended up out here because she accidentally fell asleep while studying outside. Ludger tells Lin that while he admires her academic drive, she desperately needs to learn how to read the room, leaving Lin to meekly apologize. Arender forces a polite smile, though internally she is fuming and wondering why the professor treats the two of them so differently. To their immense relief, Ludger relents, telling Arender to take care of Lin and head back to the dorms without any penalty points. When Arender hesitates, Ludger threatens to reinstate the penalty, prompting her to immediately grab Lin and sprint away before he can change his mind. But their escape is cut short as a low growl echoes through the air, and the massive shadow of the beast begins to rise once more behind Ludger. As the girls panic and try to warn him, Ludger calmly turns his head, stating that he is already well aware of the danger. The wolf-like creature glares with glowing blue eyes, gathering dark energy around its body as it prepares to make its next move. Instead of attacking, the beast suddenly launches itself backward, dashing away into the night sky to escape. Ordering the girls to find cover and get to safety, Ludger immediately sprints after the fleeing monster. A high-speed chase ensues through the dark forest as both the beast and the pursuing professor leap across the terrain. The agile creature begins scaling the vertical walls of a massive academy tower, leaping effortlessly toward the roof. Keeping pace from below, Ludger readies his weapon, releasing a metallic chain from his cane with a sharp clink. Watching from a distance, Lin turns back in absolute astonishment as she witnesses the professor's next move. The girls watch in awe as Ludger leaps gracefully across the rooftops, leaving them wondering if he just utilized high-level floating magic to give chase. Ludger stands tall on the slate roof, locking his gaze on the beast perched atop the distant spire. Closing the distance instantly, he dashes across the rooftops in a blur of motion. With a heavy metallic clash, Ludger swings his cane, striking directly against the werewolf's claws. A violent flurry of blows erupts between them, sparks flying across the sloped roof with every exchange. The werewolf thuds onto the tiles in a low crouch, growling menacingly as Ludger holds his ground. The beast lunges with a lethal swipe, but Ludger swiftly slides backward to evade the claw's path. Seizing the opening, he points his cane directly at the creature's face and detonates a fiery magic blast. Vaulting high into the night sky, Ludger gracefully flips above the pinned-down beast. From mid-air, he fires a beam of concentrated magic downward, striking the monster with precision. Watching from below, Lin and Flora stare in complete awe, wondering if this intense physical brawl is truly how a mage fights. Refusing to go down, the battered werewolf roars loudly and lunges back toward Ludger. Ludger calmly raises his arm, forming a glowing magical barrier to intercept the beast. A sharp shock of magic blasts the beast square in the chest, sending it stumbling backward. The creature loses its footing and slides down the steep roof with a loud clatter. Ready to settle the fight, Ludger channels crackling energy into his cane with absolute focus. He unleashes massive shards of ice magic that surge down the roof toward the fallen monster. Steam hisses from the shattered roof tiles as the werewolf lies completely motionless amidst the crater. Catching his breath, Ludger realizes that overusing his magic like this is taking a real toll on his stamina. He slides down the roof, knowing he must eliminate this threat quickly so he can search for the second beast. Suddenly, he flinches in surprise as the werewolf unexpectedly leaps back to its feet with fierce tenacity. The beast tightly grips a chunk of heavy roof tile in its sharp claws. Ludger's eyes widen as he senses the creature preparing an unconventional attack. The werewolf hurls the shattered debris directly at Ludger's face like a deadly projectile. As the tiles smash against his barrier, Ludger is stunned that a wild werewolf was intelligent enough to use a tool. Utilizing the distraction, the ferocious beast roars and rears back its claw for a full power strike. The ferocious beast unleashes its full power, smashing its claws against Ludger's barrier with a force that cracks the very air. As the beast dashes away into the dust cloud, Ludger is left grappling with the shocking realization that this creature is capable of utilizing tools. He reasons that if this chimera was engineered using a werewolf as its base, it shouldn't possess such advanced cognitive abilities. A typical specimen would only have enough intelligence to gauge its opponent's strength, leaving Ludger to question if this beast is truly a mere werewolf. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a panicked Aiden desperately calls out for Tessie, while his teal-haired companion suggests they finally call off the search. Turning around, the classmate reassures Aiden that they have searched everywhere, and that Tessie has likely already returned to her dormitory. With a heavy groan, the student admits they are partly to blame for not rejecting her foolish bet, asking Aiden if he truly believes Tessie is still hunting for the werewolf. Aiden looks back with a tense expression, knowing that while anyone else would have given up, Tessie is stubborn enough to keep going. Letting out a weary sigh, his companion relents, agreeing to search for just 30 more minutes before heading back. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoes through the trees, freezing both boys in absolute shock. Recognizing the voice as Tessie's, the teal-haired boy immediately sprints toward the source of the noise with Aiden hot on his heels. Their boots kick up dirt as they dash through the dark undergrowth, driven by sheer urgency. As they rush forward, a sudden rustling sound nearby makes Aiden gasp in surprise. A loud crash reverberates through the forest canopy alongside another startled cry. Aiden stumbles and clutches his head in pain after colliding with something, prompting his friend to call out in concern. To their relief, they find Tessie sitting on the ground rubbing her head, completely surprised to see Aiden standing there. When Aiden mentions they ran over because of her scream, Tessie instantly turns red and defensively denies making any such sound. Before the bickering can escalate, Tessie suddenly shushes them and tells them to quietly follow her as she spots something in the brush. The three students crouch down and peer through the rustling leaves of a nearby bush, their eyes wide with anticipation. Resting in the clearing is a small, leaf-covered creature, prompting them to wonder if they have finally found the werewolf. Upon closer inspection, it turns out to be an incredibly adorable wolf cub, sleeping peacefully as it huffs and puffs. Tessie proudly smirks and claims victory in their bet, but Aiden quickly points out that she merely stumbled upon the cub rather than capturing it. Determined to prove herself, Tessie boasts that she will simply capture the little beast right then and there. Aiden reaches out to stop her, explaining that the cub appears to be injured and unable to move, having deliberately hidden itself under the leaves. A cold shiver runs down Tessie's spine as she realizes that an injured cub couldn't possibly have covered itself with leaves all on its own. Tessie anxiously whispers, asking if there is another werewolf nearby, while Aiden admits he isn't certain but is positive that someone must have aided the cub. Just then, Aiden's eyes widen behind his glasses as he notices something unusual catching his attention. Peering closer through the foliage, he spots a metallic chain tightly wrapped around the creature's body, reflecting a faint glint of light. Before he can even process the strange chain, a massive, terrifying werewolf suddenly looms directly behind the three unsuspecting students. The beast unleashes a menacing growl, baring its razor-sharp fangs as saliva drips slowly from its jaws. Sensing the imminent danger, Leo quickly whips his head around with a look of pure panic. He desperately screams Aiden's name as he notices the monster lunging directly toward them. With a powerful push, Leo shoves both Aiden and Tessie aside just as the massive beast strikes, taking the brunt of the impact himself. Leo is sent flying, skidding forcefully across the forest floor as his friends call out his name in horror. Tessie stumbles back in absolute terror, her worst fears confirmed as she stares up at the colossal werewolf towering over Aiden. Shaking with fear, Tessie tries to steady her breathing, reaching for her wand in a desperate attempt to defend them and eliminate the beast. She steels her resolve, reminding herself that she must defeat this monster to reinstate her family's lost noble title, even as the wolf's glowing blue eye locks onto her. But before she can cast a spell, the wolf lunges, forcing Aiden to throw himself over Tessie to shield her from the deadly swipe. Tessie gasps in utter shock, completely stunned that Aiden would risk his own life to protect her. From across the clearing, a bruised Leo watches the close call in horror and screams Aiden's name. Aiden immediately checks on Tessie to see if she is hurt, leaving her to bewilderedly ask why he would ever save her. Aiden warmly responds that he could never stand by and watch his friend get killed, leaving Tessie completely speechless. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoes through the clearing as the massive beast lands right back in front of the pair. Aiden steps forward to shield Tessie once more, calmly suggesting that the werewolf is only acting aggressively out of protection for its cub. He addresses the beast directly to confirm his theory, prompting a panicked Tessie to scream that the monster cannot understand human speech. Undeterred, Aiden gently reassures the werewolf that they mean no harm and will not hurt its baby. To everyone's absolute shock, the werewolf actually pauses and turns away, causing the students to flinch in surprise. Emitting a soft growl, the giant wolf leans down protectively over the leafy bush where its injured cub is hidden. Aiden sighs in relief, explaining that the mother was just overprotective, while Tessie wonders in disbelief if it truly understood him, and Leo warns that they still can't let their guard down. Turning back to his friends with a serious look, Aiden acknowledges that he might sound unreasonable, but begs them to trust him just this once. Aiden turns back to the intimidating beast, gently raising his hand and assuring the snarling werewolf that he has no intention of hurting it. Pulling out a small vial of blue potion, he asks if the cub is badly injured and offers the healing medicine, admitting its effects might be weak but helpful. The massive creature hesitates in silence before slowly extending its sharp, clawed hand to accept the offering from the cautious student. The giant, menacing claws draw closer and closer to the delicate glass vial resting in Aiden's palm. But before the exchange can happen, a sudden, devastating beam of light smashes down from above, striking the werewolf and sending Aiden flying backward. A massive burst of golden energy detonates on impact, completely engulfing the area in a blinding flash. The crackling magical energy solidifies into glowing restraints, trapping the agonizing werewolf as it lets out a painful howl. A stern voice calls out their names as a commanding figure steps into the clearing, leaving the three students completely frozen in shock. It is none other than Professor Ludger, who demands to know what on earth they are doing out in the forest at this hour. Tessie immediately panics and screams his name in sheer terror, while Leo struggles to find the words to explain their situation. Coldly telling them he will deal with their punishment later, Ludger orders the students to get behind him, prompting Tessie and Leo to quickly obey. However, Aiden refuses to back down, boldly dashing in front of the professor to block his path. He desperately pleads with Ludger not to kill the beast, explaining his belief that the werewolf can actually understand human speech. Ludger merely glares at him with utter disdain, dismissing his claims as absolute nonsense. Aiden insists it is not nonsense and tries to explain further, completely unaware of a sudden rustling sound coming from the nearby bushes. Under the suffocating pressure of the professor's icy, glowing gaze, Aiden begins to break a sweat. Without saying another word, Ludger forcefully shoves Aiden out of the way to clear his line of sight. Tumbled onto the grass, Aiden looks back in utter bewilderment, deeply unsettled by the chilling expression he just saw on his teacher's face. Suddenly, a massive wall of raging fire erupts around the professor, illuminating the dark forest in a brilliant blaze. Standing tall amidst the roaring flames, Ludger presents an imposing and untouchable figure. Aiden can only stare in absolute awe as the heat of the crackling fire washes over him. With his back still turned, Ludger sternly warns them that they will face full responsibility for their disobedience come morning. He then issues a final, absolute command for them to return to their dormitories immediately. The tense night eventually passes, giving way to a bright and clear morning sky. Back at the academy, the three exhausted students sit slumped at a long wooden table, dreading the impending punishment they are about to face. The trio is engulfed in absolute despair, dreading the terrifying wrath of Professor Ludger, while Aiden silently beats himself up for his poor performance and showing weakness. Tessie anxiously glances over, her mind filled with worry about the severe consequences awaiting them. Aiden remains lost in his heavy thoughts, bracing himself for the absolute worst. Suddenly, a cheerful voice calls out to them, breaking the tense silence of the room. The Academy's president enters with a radiant, sparkling smile, asking if they had been waiting long as a silent Ludger follows behind. The students are completely shocked to see the president herself, who warmly tells them to make themselves comfortable. Seeing the president herself take a seat next to Ludger makes the students realize that this is far more serious than a standard disciplinary meeting. Under the table, fear takes over as they are asked why they think they were summoned, knowing it will be much worse than simple penalty points. Ludger coldly confirms their fears, reminding them of just how incredibly reckless and dangerous their actions were the night before. The room falls dead silent as Ludger bluntly points out that a single mistake could have cost one of them their lives. The president tries to lighten the mood, telling Ludger not to terrify the poor students, though Ludger insists on the gravity of the situation. She gently points out that all's well that ends well, mentioning that Ludger had already explained the entire situation to her in detail. Aiden gasps in surprise when the president praises him for risking his life to save Tessie, leaving him flustered. While acknowledging their actions were wrong and issuing 10 penalty points to each of them, she maintains her gentle demeanor. However, she isn't finished yet, leaving them hanging on a single crucial word. To their utter shock, she rewards them with 20 merit points for their bravery during the crisis, completely turning the situation around. She playfully asks Ludger if he has any objections, to which the stern professor can only reluctantly agree. Encouraging them to keep up the hard work, the president leaves the students bowing and thanking her in immense relief. As they begin to leave, Aiden pauses, casting a lingering look back at the imposing professor. He remains deep in thought, sensing there is more to the story than meets the eye. Once the students are gone, the president directly asks Ludger if he is finally satisfied with how things turned out. She reveals that it was actually Ludger who requested her to go easy on them, a favor for which the professor quietly expresses his gratitude. Shifting to a more serious tone, she inquires if there was anything unusual about the werewolves, but Ludger reports nothing out of the ordinary. Accepting his answer, she thanks Ludger once more, acknowledging that the students are only safe because of his timely intervention. With high expectations, she expresses her hope to see many more of his successes in the future. Left alone in his dimly lit office, Ludger sits quietly at his desk, reflecting on the grim events of the night. As he stares into the empty room, a troubling memory begins to resurface in his mind. He recalls the moment he cornered the werewolf, bound in glowing magical restraints, while a small cub watched helplessly from the bushes. There was something deeply unsettling about the beast's partially covered, scarred body rustling in the leaves. Closing his eyes, Ludger's suspicion solidifies as he remembers the exact detail that caught his attention. Beneath the coarse fur and foliage, he had caught a glimpse of a body that was still partially human. It was clear that the poor soul's transformation into a monster had not yet been fully completed. Sitting in the silence of his study, Ludger realizes the horrifying truth. These beasts weren't created from wild wolves. Instead, a shadowy faction was capturing innocent humans and forcefully transforming them into these bloodthirsty werewolves. Even knowing this tragedy, Ludger feels no regret for eliminating them, as leaving them alive would have put his own life at risk. He justifies his actions by reminding himself that they had already lost their humanity and were actively harming others. For him, protecting his cover and the students was more than enough reason to unleash his final, destructive spell. He had to put an end to their suffering, convincing himself that there was no other choice. With a bright flash of light, the young cub had closed its eyes, finally finding peace in its final moments. Back in the present, Ludger stares ahead, knowing he cannot let this twisted human experimentation go uninvestigated. Reaching into his coat, he pulls out a glowing blue communication artifact to contact his trusted informant. The device twinkles with light as Ludger initiates the call, identifying himself to his ally, Hans. Without wasting any time, Ludger gets straight to the point, stating that he has a crucial favor to ask of him. The next morning, the sun shines brightly over the academy grounds as the students celebrate their unexpected reward points instead of being punished. Sitting on a bench, the injured student nods and reassures his friends that his arm just needs a few days to fully heal. However, the red-haired girl notices that Aiden seems completely lost in thought, casting a worried glance in his direction. When she asks if something is bothering him, Aiden quickly snaps out of his daze and tries to brush it off as nothing. In reality, Aiden can't stop thinking about the cub werewolf from the previous night, specifically the strange chain restraint around its neck. When he quietly shares this detail, the girl gasps in shock, prompting their injured friend to quickly hush her so they don't draw attention. Pondering the mystery, Aiden realizes that Professor Ludger must have intervened because he suspected the beasts were being controlled by someone else. Aiden ponders the idea of beast control, prompting his blue-haired friend to recall a dark rumor about suspicious figures operating right within Siren Academy, shocking Tessie, who thought they were just baseless rumors. The blue-haired student nods, admitting that a werewolf outfitted with restraints is far too bizarre to ignore, while Aiden hesitantly prepares to share another troubling detail. Tessie asks if he plans to report this to Professor Ludger, but Aiden admits his reluctance, revealing that the professor himself was acting incredibly suspicious the previous night. Aiden recalls the chilling moment from the night before, convinced that Professor Ludger had witnessed something highly unusual as well. This gut feeling leaves Aiden absolutely certain that the professor is hiding a massive secret. Tessie presses further, asking if the professor was trying to cover up the truth, to which Aiden replies that while he isn't entirely sure, the man definitely knows more than he lets on. Trying to rationalize, Aiden wonders if he is just overthinking things, reasoning that a prestigious academy professor wouldn't be involved in such shady dealings. Yet, a dark, lingering doubt remains in his mind as he envisions the professor standing amongst a group of mysterious cloaked figures. He can't help but wonder if the mysterious professor is directly connected to the sinister rumors plaguing the academy. Suddenly, a sharp voice cuts through his train of thought, bluntly calling him a fool. Tessie stomps her foot in frustration, telling Aiden that his imagination is getting out of hand and reminding him of the academy president's official statement. She points out that the president confirmed Ludger explained the entire beast incident to her in detail, arguing that he wouldn't have done so if he were guilty. With absolute conviction, Tessie asserts that despite his cold exterior, Professor Ludger ultimately put his life on the line to protect them. She scolds them for even harboring doubts about their savior, leaving both boys feeling incredibly guilty and speechless. Aiden quickly backs down, agreeing with Tessie and deciding there is no use stressing over unproven theories. Eager to change the subject, Aiden stands up and suggests they grab some food, realizing that it is already lunchtime. When Aiden casually invites Tessie to join them, she gasps in complete shock, caught off guard by the sudden invitation. Stammering slightly, Aiden explains that it's only natural for friends to share a meal together. Hearing him warmly refer to her as a friend causes Tessie's face to instantly turn bright red as her heart skips a beat. Trying to hide her embarrassment, Tessie huffs that she'll make an exception just this once, delighting Aiden while their injured friend can only sigh in the background. Meanwhile, in a quiet office, a mysterious contact asks if the documents they sent over have been reviewed yet. Ludger examines the files, which contain a detailed list of recent missing persons from Reederbelk and the specific locations where they used to gather. The informant notes that several large, sturdy men have been seen frequenting a nearby abandoned factory, confirming it as the primary target and earning a word of approval from Ludger. The contact adds that they also investigated the missing workers outside the city, prompting Ludger to ask if a family of 3 was among the victims. The informant confirms his suspicion, stating that it was indeed the sole case where an entire family vanished without a trace. Ludger calmly acknowledges the information and tells his contact that he will be arriving at the location shortly. The scene shifts to a gloomy industrial area by the water, where smoke billows from factory chimneys under a dark night sky. Outside the facility, 2 armed guards complain about their boring shifts, wondering how much longer they have to remain stationed there. One of them bitterly blames their extended stay on the test subjects who managed to escape, questioning how they even pulled off such a feat. He explains that a young boy they had kidnapped reacted poorly to the experimental drugs, throwing a massive fit when they tried to increase his dosage. The guard reveals that the boy's parents went wild upon seeing their son's distress, prompting his partner to ask in disbelief if they still recognized their child even after he was mutated into a werewolf. The flashback shows the werewolf family tearing through the facility in a frenzy before making their escape, leaving a bloody mess for the cleanup crew. Annoyed by the trouble caused by a mere child, the guard boasts that he would have personally taught the kid a lesson if he had been there. Suddenly, both guards flinch as a sharp noise cuts through the quiet night air. Realizing something is wrong, they silently nod to each other, instantly on high alert. One of them quickly reaches down to pull his revolver from his holster to prepare for an intruder. But before they can react, two silent, lethal projectiles pierce straight through their heads in a flash of light. Their lifeless bodies collapse instantly, one slumping over the railing, while the other falls backward onto the platform with a heavy thud. A heavy boot steps forward, splashing into the wet ground as the mysterious assassin approaches. Dressed in a dark, hooded trench coat and a face mask, Ludger confidently strides forward into the facility's entrance. His piercing blue eyes gleam with cold determination from beneath the shadow of his hood. A voice calls out from the darkness, acknowledging Ludger's arrival. Hans is waiting for him, commenting on Ludger's battle-ready attire and noting that he must be dead serious about this mission. Hans asks if Ludger plans to infiltrate the place alone, to which Ludger retorts by asking if Hans would actually help, prompting Hans to sheepishly offer to handle a grunt or two. Ludger declines the offer, stating he can handle it alone, and asks for the enemy count, which Hans reveals to be around 40 men who are preparing to evacuate. As Ludger adjusts his gear, Hans warns him that every guard is armed with a gun, 3 are heavily armored, and they even have 2 black mages on their side. Hans points out the sewer grate that serves as the entry point, telling Ludger to be careful as Ludger calmly accepts the warning. Just as Ludger turns to leave, he stops to ask Hans one more question regarding the missing family of 3. With a solemn tone, Ludger asks Hans how old the child in that family actually was. As Ludger begins his descent down the stone steps, Hans is left momentarily surprised by the sudden inquiry about the kid. Hans solemnly reveals that the child was only 7 years old, a mere innocent kid caught in the crossfire. Upon hearing this, Ludger repeats the age in his mind, deeply disturbed by the fact that a 7-year-old was targeted. With a cold "I see," Ludger continues down the dark corridor, leaving a stunned Hans watching his back. His heavy footsteps echo through the stone archway as he moves forward with lethal intent. Suddenly, the darkness is shattered by desperate screams, frantic gunshots, and pleas for mercy as Ludger begins his assault. A guard lies lifeless on the floor, blood pooling on his chest next to his dropped revolver, as Ludger's steady steps approach. The entire hallway is a scene of absolute carnage, littered with the bloody bodies of defeated guards as Ludger walks past them unfazed. Amidst the silent hallway of death, a glowing magical wasp buzzes through the air, observing the aftermath. The insect blinks its compound eye, transmitting the visual feed of the slaughter to its master. Back in the main facility, the workers and researchers remain busy, oblivious to the danger creeping closer. However, the tattooed leader notices something amiss, letting out a suspicious grunt. Realizing there is an intruder, he orders his men to stop all operations and immediately redirect everyone to the security area. As the magical wasp lands on his finger, the leader muses that the intruder isn't just an ordinary security threat, which actually makes things more interesting. A sinister grin spreads across his face as he realizes this is his chance to eliminate a major threat. He eagerly anticipates completely wiping out whoever dared to break into their domain. The guards quickly prepare for battle, cocking their revolvers with sharp clicks at the command to fire. But as they pull the triggers, nothing happens but empty clicks, leaving the guards completely bewildered. Ludger stands before them, casting a silent spell represented by glowing, swirling gears. Recognizing the spell as Fire's Silence, the guards realize they are facing a powerful mage and frantically prepare to draw their knives since their guns are useless. Unbothered by their charge, Ludger calmly reaches down to unholster his own firearm. One of the guards laughs arrogantly as he rushes forward, believing Ludger is making a rookie mistake by trying to use a gun within the silencing field. His arrogance is instantly cut short when a bullet pierces his forehead with a sudden, lethal blast. Ludger's gun smokes silently, surrounded by a blue magical aura that bypasses the silencing spell. The surviving guards recoil in absolute horror, realizing in terror that he is firing magic bullets. Suddenly, a massive metal boot stomps down heavily as a powerful reinforcement steps in to take charge of the fight. The newly arrived armored guard charges up a massive high-tech weapon, confident that even a powerful mage won't survive a direct blast from his electrical cannon. With a maniacal laugh, he fires a massive surge of high-voltage electricity directly down the corridor, expecting to vaporize his target instantly. But his triumph is short-lived as he stares in utter disbelief at what lies ahead. Standing completely unfazed, the hooded intruder effortlessly blocks the devastating lightning blast with a compact, hexagonal metallic barrier. The guard instantly realizes his high-voltage attack is useless, recognizing that his opponent is utilizing advanced metallic elemental alchemy to ground the electricity. Before he can react, a sudden shockwave erupts, shattering the guard's weapon and sending sparks flying. In a split second of pure panic, the guard watches his armor buckle under the intense feedback as the residual energy backfires. A violent surge of electricity completely engulfs the armored reinforcement and his allies in an agonizing, blinding shock. As the smoke clears, our protagonist stands calmly, noting that this single technique has already wiped out 20 of his enemies in one fell swoop. He silently glances upward, his sharp eyes scanning the dark ceiling of the corridor. Without hesitation, he raises his gun and fires a precise shot directly into the air. His bullet perfectly strikes a mechanical wasp, confirming his suspicion that someone was spying on him through the insect's eyes. Recognizing the insect reconnaissance technique, he deduces that the notorious vermin brothers of the underworld are waiting for him just ahead. Deciding to blind his observers completely, he prepares to stomp out the remaining surveillance bugs. With a heavy stomp, he unleashes a powerful shockwave of wind magic that ripples across the entire floor. The localized gale force wind sweeps through the passage, instantly knocking the remaining mechanical wasps out of the air. One by one, the disabled spy drones crash lifelessly onto the cold stone floor. Deep within the facility, a blonde-haired man watches in silence as his connection to his scouting insects suddenly dies. Realizing his feed has gone completely dark, he analyzes the strange vibration he felt right before the disconnect, wondering if the intruder is using wind-based magic. Knowing that small winged insects are useless against a wind mage, he realizes he needs to deploy a much larger, more resilient beast to deal with this dual-element threat. He turns to his massive, hulking partner, Varen, and orders him to prepare for the upcoming clash. Pointing toward the main entrance, he instructs his heavily armed guards to give the intruder a lethal welcome the moment he steps through the door. But before they can set their trap, the lights suddenly flicker and plunge the entire room into pitch-black darkness, throwing the guards into an immediate panic. Sensing the calculated move, the blonde leader mutters to Varen, fully aware that the intruder has already sabotaged their power supply. But as a heavy thud echoes right beside him, he turns in alarm, calling out his partner's name as dread begins to set in. To his absolute horror, the blonde leader turns only to find Varen's headless torso standing rigidly beside him, completely devoid of life. Right at his feet, Varen's severed head rolls across the cold floor, leaving a dark trail of blood in its wake. Realizing his partner is dead, the blonde leader panics, shouting Varen's name in sheer disbelief as a nearby barrel clatters to the ground. Sweat dripping down his face, he realizes the terrifying truth. The intruder is already inside the room, having cut the power only moments before. Desperate to defend himself, the leader summons a massive, dark centipede that begins to slither out from his sleeve. The grotesque insect rapidly crawls up his back, preparing to unleash its venomous power against the hidden foe. But before he can even launch an attack, the hooded intruder suddenly materializes right behind him, his cold gaze locked onto his target. With blinding speed, the cloaked warrior lunges forward, slashing through the air and catching the blonde leader completely off guard. Barely dodging the lethal strike, the leader retreats, realizing he is dealing with a dangerous war mage capable of lethal close-quarters combat. In a flash of brilliant light, the intruder instantly summons a glowing magic circle, preparing to unleash a devastating spell. The leader's eyes widen in sheer terror as he recognizes the flame bolt spell, stunned by how effortlessly the mage cast it in an instant. A roaring torrent of fire erupts from the magic circle, engulfing the blonde leader in a blinding, painful explosion. Screaming in agony, his charred body rolls across the floor as the intense flames continue to consume him. The hooded intruder calmly steps forward through the smoke, leaving the remaining gang members frozen in absolute shock at how easily their leader was defeated. Looking down at the smoking, blackened remains of their boss, the survivors can only mutter in despair, realizing they stand no chance. With cold precision, the cloaked figure raises his revolver, the metallic click of the hammer cocking echoing through the tense silence. The remaining thugs tremble in fear behind their shields, unable to comprehend how both of the powerful vermin brothers were taken out so effortlessly. As the intruder slowly turns his head toward them, the terrified guards flinch, hesitating to make even a single move. Beneath his hood, the warrior's piercing blue eyes lock onto them, radiating a chilling intent that freezes them in their tracks. Suddenly, he swings his arm in a swift motion, deflecting an unexpected incoming projectile with absolute ease. To his surprise, the attack wasn't a weapon, but a massive, armored insect leg thrusting directly toward him. The giant, spiked appendage is growing directly out of Varen's supposedly dead, headless body, cracking the floorboards beneath it. With sickening crunches and cracks, the headless corpse begins to contort and stand back up, muttering a curse about the pain. Shockingly, a grotesque mouth lined with sharp teeth splits open right in the palm of the corpse's hand, complaining about the injury. Snickering maniacally, the hand-mouth taunts the intruder, amused that a surprise attack actually managed to take down Bruno before he could even join the fight. Staring down his bizarre opponent, the hooded intruder calls him an insect human, genuinely surprised that the creature is completely fine even after having its head chopped off. The headless body begins to swell and mutate with a sickening sloshing sound, as the creature boasts that it has already transcended the limits of the human form. Sensing an overwhelming danger, the intruder reacts with shock as a massive, dark shadow begins to loom directly over him. Suddenly, a massive insectoid leg slams down with a violent smash, shattering the ground beneath. Revealing its monstrous, giant mantis-like form, the beast declares that it doesn't even care that its brother was killed. Instead, it promises to make the intruder pay a brutal price by ripping him limb from limb. Watching the horror unfold, the nearby men panic in absolute terror, screaming for everyone to run away. The colossal insect unleashes a chaotic flurry of strikes, tearing through the wooden crates and throwing the entire area into disarray. As the intruder parries the heavy blows, he questions if the beast has any regard for its own men, but the monster retorts that he should stop moving if he's so worried about them. Seizing a brief opening, the hooded warrior aims his revolver and fires multiple shots directly at the beast. However, the bullets merely spark and bounce harmlessly off the creature's thick, armored exoskeleton. The monster immediately retaliates with a heavy slam, forcing the intruder back as he grunts under the pressure of the impact. Needing more firepower, the intruder conjures a brilliant orange magic circle, preparing a powerful spell. He unleashes a torrential pillar of fire straight into the giant beast as it lunges down at him. To his absolute shock, The intruder realizes the massive beast was somehow agile enough to dodge the brunt of the magical blast. Before he can recover, one of the creature's massive appendages whips out and violently clamps onto him. Despite being caught, the hooded mage quickly gathers his energy once more, flashing a bright magical sigil from his hand. He detonates the magic point blank, creating a blinding explosion of light and energy right in the creature's face. But as the smoke clears, the monster's terrifying face emerges completely unscathed, its jagged teeth bared in a sinister grin. The intruder's heart sinks as he realizes his opponent is completely unharmed even after taking a direct hit from his magic. Capitalizing on its durability, the giant beast swings its massive claw in a devastating slam, smashing everything in its path. Mocking his opponent's efforts, the monster sneers that if he wants to burn him, he'll need to use at least fourth circle magic. Laughing maniacally, the beast repeatedly smashes its heavy claws into the ground to crush the intruder once and for all. However, as the dust settles, the creature suddenly stops, blinking in confusion as it realizes something is off. Looking down at the empty, smoking crater, the monster is left utterly baffled to find that its target has completely vanished. The giant, insect-like beast frantically searches the area, its joints creaking as it wonders where its prey could have possibly vanished to. Suddenly, a massive blade slices down from above with a deafening whoosh, catching the monster completely off guard. With lightning-fast reflexes, the creature raises its massive claw, clashing against the incoming strike with a heavy metallic ring. Our protagonist lands gracefully on the ground nearby, his heavy boots thudding against the stone as the dust from the clash settles. The beast grins with its razor-sharp teeth, drool dripping from its jaws as it mockingly commends the hero for having some impressive moves. Unfazed, the protagonist snickers, throwing back a sharp retort that the monster is merely as swift as a common fly. He quickly assesses the situation, realizing that standard firearms and third circle magic won't cut it, and the beast won't give him enough time to cast fourth circle magic. Clenching his fist, he admits that he really didn't want to resort to using his ultimate trump card. Sensing a sudden shift in the air, the beast tilts its head in confusion, wondering what the human is planning. Declaring that the monster has left him with no choice, the hero begins channeling an immense, blinding golden energy from his hands. Meanwhile, outside the factory, his ally shivers violently in the cold, regretful that he didn't dress warmer for the night. He anxiously wonders if taking down two black mages at once was too much, but deep down, he knows the protagonist isn't someone who would easily die here. Suddenly, a strange flickering light catches his attention, causing him to turn around in surprise. A brilliant, blinding flash erupts from the windows of the factory, illuminating the entire alleyway. A massive, blazing explosion of fire and light bursts outward, completely engulfing the building in a spectacular display of power. Watching the inferno, the ally realizes with awe that the protagonist has finally unleashed what he calls real magic. He can't help but scratch his head, muttering that magic is just magic, unable to comprehend what makes this real magic so different. The protagonist calmly steps out of the shadows carrying a briefcase, prompting the ally to ask what happened, only to be told that everyone, including the test subjects, has been dealt with. When the ally solemnly asks if there was any way to save the test subjects, the protagonist grimly replies that a painless death was the only mercy left for them. Examining a syringe containing the werewolf serum, the ally remarks on how terrifying the world is, noting that a massive human trial like this requires a massive financial backer. The protagonist stands tall, assuring his companion that he has already deduced the identity of the mastermind funding the operation. Shocked by the revelation, the ally quickly rises to his feet, trying to process the news as he asks for clarification. However, he quickly dismisses his own questions, realizing he can't stop the protagonist anyway, and decides to head back to the hideout. Left alone, the protagonist stands before the raging inferno, his face cast in shadow as the flames crackle behind him. The scene then shifts to a lavishly decorated, empty dining hall, setting the stage for the powerful figures pulling the strings from high society. The silence of the dining hall is shattered as a plate of food is violently thrown, sending sharp ceramic shards flying right into a terrified maid's face. As the injured maid bleeds from her face, her co-workers can only watch in absolute terror while their master continues his furious, greedy rant. This tyrannical noble, Belbot Rickson, screams insults at his staff, completely unbothered by the physical harm he just caused. His voice echoes through the halls, filled with nothing but pure malice and contempt for those beneath him. Huffing with rage, the old man storms out of the dining room, still cursing his servants for their supposed laziness. Privately, he fumes over his failed human experiments, though he finds a twisted silver lining in the fact that someone else disposed of the escaped test subjects for him. His eyes gleam with a sinister light as he reminds himself that his dark research is finally yielding the breakthrough results he desires. He is obsessed with reclaiming his youth, convinced that his frail, aging body will soon be restored to its absolute peak. As Belbot opens the door to his private quarters, he dreams of becoming a perfect, godlike being, having sacrificed everything to develop this life-altering drug. But his grand ambitions are cut short when he notices a mysterious, cloaked intruder silently waiting for him on the balcony. Startled, the old noble spins around, demanding to know the identity of the uninvited guest. Before he can even react, the assassin lunges forward with incredible speed, slamming the old man hard onto the floor. Gasping for breath under the tight grip, Belbot desperately screams out for his guards to save him. The intruder coldly informs him that a silence spell has already been cast, ensuring that his desperate cries for help will never leave this room. Holding the corrupt noble by the throat, the assailant addresses him by name, preparing to interrogate him. The assassin speaks of a tragic 7-year-old child who was subjected to horrific experiments, forced to live as a monster alongside his family. Even when faced with the person sent to end his life, the innocent beast child could only offer a peaceful smile. It was a heartbreaking expression of gratitude, as if the boy was thanking his executioner for finally releasing him from this living nightmare. A burning rage ignites in the assassin's eye as he recalls the agonizing burden of having to burn those innocent souls alive. He demands to know if the heartless noble has any concept of the immense psychological pain caused by his atrocities. Under the weight of this intense bloodlust, Belbot can only flinch, feeling the cold grip of death tightening around his neck. Instead of showing remorse, the wicked noble lets out a sickening chuckle, realizing this intruder was the one who cleaned up his loose ends. Attempting to save his own skin, Belbot desperately tries to negotiate, but the assassin shuts him down, demanding a direct answer. The old man scoffs at the assassin's guilt, callously dismissing the test subjects as mere trash whose lives held absolutely no value. With sickening pride, Belbot argues that he actually did those victims a favor, claiming their deaths were a noble sacrifice for the advancement of humanity. Listening to Belbot's remorseless justification, the assassin coldly mutters that he has heard enough. Without hesitation, he plunges a syringe filled with dark red liquid straight into the old man's neck. Belbot's eye widens in sheer panic as he struggles to comprehend what has just been injected into him. Looking down at his victim, the assassin calmly remarks that Belbot's explanation was so thorough, he can't even find it in himself to be angry. As Belbot collapses to the floor demanding to know what was in the needle, the assassin simply turns his back on him. He explains that he found the laboratory records quite fascinating, specifically the notes on a drug capable of transforming a person into a werewolf with just a tiny dose. A twisted sense of curiosity then took hold of the assassin. He wondered what would happen if someone were injected with an entire bottle of that highly potent serum, while Belbot begins to choke in agony. Belbot's body begins to violently warp and crack as his teeth sharpen into monstrous fangs during a painful mutation. Within moments, the old man completely transforms into a grotesque, multi-armed werewolf beast that roars furiously at the assassin. Knowing the beast can no longer comprehend human speech, the assassin prepares his next move. He raises his hand to conjure a swirling vortex of water magic to shield himself from the rampaging monster. He coldly declares his desire for Belbot to suffer the exact same agony his victims endured, as a deafening roar shakes the mansion. Down the hall, the estate guards hear the commotion and sprint toward Belabot's private chambers in alarm. Bursting through the double doors, they shout for their master, only to be met with a horrifying sight. The guards gasp in utter disbelief as they realize they are standing before a terrifying beast. They tremble in fear, desperately wondering where such a horrific creature could have come from. The mages among them quickly prepare their wands to restrain the beast, ordering the non-magic guards to search for Belbot. But the enraged beast immediately lunges forward, tearing through their magical defenses with primal fury. Panic erupts as the guards realize their attacks aren't stopping it, screaming at each other to pour every ounce of their magic into the monster. Meanwhile, far away from the chaotic battle, a quiet stone corridor remains completely undisturbed. Inside a hidden room, a man mutters in quiet awe at what he sees. Staring into a massive open safe, the man marvels at the contents while his companion tells him to take what is needed for his work and conceal the rest. He asks if his partner is leaving so soon after all the effort spent securing this hideout, but the departing ally promises to return shortly. The departing ally explains he needs to secure a proper cover identity for the underworld, leaving the man to rest and begin his work. With his plans set, the mysterious ally steps out into the cool night, walking down the quiet street lined with glowing lamps. He pauses and glances back toward the building, his sharp eyes reflecting the dark, cloudy sky above. Nearby, a small vessel floats quietly on the dark waters of the canal, waiting for its next departure. Clenching his armored fist, he steels his resolve for the trials that lay ahead. He stands by the railing, staring out at the distant boat as a cold wind sweeps across the harbor. The next morning, a frenzy of reporters gathers outside a grand estate, whispering in disbelief about the wealthy old man, Rickson, who was allegedly eaten by a monster. Flashbulbs pop as the press discusses the lack of evidence left behind, fueling wild rumors that Rickson was secretly practicing black magic. When asked about the beast's fate, another journalist reveals that the mage guards engaged in a brutal hour-long battle to incinerate the creature. Suddenly, one of the reporters stops mid-sentence, distracted by a sudden shift in the atmosphere. A crisp white boot steps firmly onto the stone pavement, commanding immediate attention. The crowd parts in awe as a high-ranking officer from the security bureau arrives, sending shockwaves of murmurs through the onlookers. Gasps echo as they realize that the legendary Knights of Nightcrawler have joined the scene. Led by the Lord Protector herself, the formidable Knight Commander, Tarina Lionhowl, makes her grand entrance. The press goes wild, realizing this case is far more significant than they thought, and they quickly shift their focus to writing about the Bureau's involvement. Tarina approaches the estate's heavy iron gates, leaving the guard visibly sweating in her intimidating presence. With absolute authority, she calmly commands the guard to open the gates. Terrified but trying to do his job, the guard stammers that he is strictly forbidden from letting anyone enter. Her eyes flare with a menacing purple glow as she repeats her command, leaving no room for negotiation. Overwhelmed by her terrifying aura, the guards instantly flinch and nod in compliance. The iron gates creak open, and Tarina strides confidently into the mansion's courtyard. Followed closely by her elite squad, she marches through the grand hallways to take control of the investigation. Inside, Inspector Tebrin quickly salutes her, expressing his immense honor at meeting the legendary commander. She wastes no time, declaring that the Security Bureau is officially taking over the case and ordering him to hand over all evidence immediately. Stunned by the sudden takeover, Tebrin can only nod and meekly agree to her demands. Orders are quickly given to evacuate the premises, clearing the way for Tarina and her squad to begin their thorough investigation. Once they are left alone, the heavy doors close behind them with a sharp click, leaving Tarina and her trusted squad to begin their investigation of the study. Enya immediately lets her guard down, sighing in relief at how exhausting it was to maintain her serious facade, which prompts Lloyd to sternly tell her to behave. Enya playfully retorts that there is absolutely no reason to stay stiff and formal when there is nobody else around to watch them. However, Lloyd remains completely serious, insisting that as members of the prestigious Nightcrawlers, they must uphold their flawless reputation at all times. Tarina steps in to break up the bickering, gently siding with Enya by stating that a relaxed attitude is perfectly fine as long as they do not show it to outsiders. But the moment Tarina reminds them of their true objective, both Lloyd and Enya instantly snap to attention, saluting with absolute discipline. Approaching the giant, charred silhouette in the center of the study, Tarina looks down at the beast in disgust, calling the sight truly appalling. She notes that the victim, Belbot Rixin, was rumored to be involved in cryptid research rather than black magic, making his sudden death by a rogue monster highly suspicious. Flipping through his notes, Lloyd confirms that every single witness report perfectly aligns, stating only that a monster appeared and killed the wealthy merchant. Enya closely inspects the charred remains, noting that the creature is so thoroughly burned that identifying its species or origin is practically impossible. Deciding that the beast itself yields no more clues, Tarina commands her squad to begin searching the rest of the room. The squad quickly disperses across the lavish study, with Lloyd checking the windows, Enya searching the furniture, and Tarina focusing on the portraits lining the walls. Tarina stands quietly before a beautifully framed portrait of a woman, her sharp eyes scanning the wooden paneling around it. She notices a subtle imperfection. The frame is slightly tilted on an otherwise pristine, dust-free section of the wall. With a light click, Tarina pushes the frame aside, revealing a hidden mechanism that slides the wall panel open. Lloyd is surprised to see a secret compartment, but Tarina peers inside only to find it completely empty. Kneeling down to inspect the recess, Tarina deduces that the size and hidden location make it the absolute perfect spot for a secret safe. Enya chimes in, pointing out that a notoriously ruthless businessman like Rixin would naturally want to hide his illicit black money in such a spot. Tarina agrees, confidently stating that the wealthy merchant definitely kept his private slush fund here, and that the safe was present up until last night. Pointing out the complete lack of dust inside the compartment, she connects the dots between the merchant's death, the monster's arrival, and the stolen safe. To Tarina, this sequence of events is far too perfect to simply be a series of random coincidences. It is glaringly obvious that someone orchestrated this entire incident, but she wonders who could possibly pull off such a heist without leaving a single shred of evidence. As she contemplates the sheer level of skill required for such a flawless crime, only one legendary figure comes to her mind. She envisions the Phantom Thief standing proudly against the backdrop of a full moon, clad in a top hat and a flowing cape. With a grim look on her face, Tarina quietly mutters the name of the culprit, Arsène Lupin. Startled by her sudden movement, Lloyd asks what's wrong, but Tarina quickly brushes it off as she rises, claiming it was nothing. She immediately pivots, asking Lloyd if there have been any unusual occurrences in Reederbelk recently, to which he replies that there was indeed one incident. Lloyd details how an abandoned factory burned completely to the ground, a suspicious event that took place right around the time of Belabot's death. Sensing a connection, Tarina's eyes narrow with determination as she asserts her belief that they will find something of value at the site. Without wasting another moment, she decisively orders them to set off and investigate the ruins.